Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Please hype me on YouTube. Thanks. I knew my wife was unfaithful long before I saw the proof. It wasn't lipstick on collars or late-night texts. It was the way the air thickened when she entered the room, as if the house itself recoiled from her. I've spent half my life pulling people from twisted cars and fire-blackened stairwells. I know the weight of death, the specific heaviness of it when you lift a body onto a stretcher. I know the temperature of it, skin cooling first at the fingertips, then creeping inward like frost. And I know the sound of it, a chest that groans as air escapes from failing lungs, the rattle of a throat that will never clear again. But the silence of my own home was worse than all of that. Silence thick as gauze, wrapping itself around me the moment Claire laughed quietly in the kitchen, her voice pitched low as if saving something for someone else. That silence didn't belong in a living house. It belonged to the dead. At first I convinced myself it was paranoia born from fatigue. 70-hour weeks grind down the edges of your mind. Exhaustion breeds apparitions. I'd lie awake after 14 hours on call, telling myself the house was steady, the marriage was intact, the shadows nothing more than shadows. Yet the details kept stacking like evidence in a case file. A perfume I never bought clung to our sheets. Not Claire's usual lavender, but something sharper, almost medicinal, laced with smoke. The living room corners seemed darker than they should have been, even with every lamp on. Once I caught her reflection in the hallway mirror bending wrong, as though her body turned left while the reflection lingered a moment too long facing forward. I told myself I'd imagined it. But paranoia has a smell, and mine smelled of iron, raw and metallic, the way blood dries on latex gloves. The first person I confided in was my brother Mark. We met at Rosie's pub on Middle Street. He nursed his beer, brow furrowed as I described the thick air, the perfume, the mirror. "You've been running yourself into the ground," he said, trying to keep it light but failing. She's not that type. Maybe the house is just old. Pipes, drafts, stress does things. "Mark, I hear the house groan like a lung filled with smoke," I told him. "Not wood. Not pipes. Breathing, that's not stress." He tried a smirk. "Maybe the house just doesn't like you." But I saw the unease in his eyes, the way he didn't want to look at me too long. At work, I let it slip to Carla, my EMT partner. We were parked outside Main Med at 3 a.m, sipping bad coffee. "You ever get the feeling someone's in your house who shouldn't be?" I asked. She side-eyed me. "You're on doubles again. This is the exhaustion talking." "No," I said. "I saw him." She let him in. I heard nothing on the floor. No footprints, nothing. "David, exhaustion makes monsters out of shadows. Get some sleep." But even she looked away too quickly, uncomfortable with the certainty in my voice. Then came the night I saw him. Rain hammered the roof as I pulled into the driveway earlier than expected. Through the window, I saw Claire answer the door. A man's silhouette stood outside. He stepped in. I leaned closer, waiting for the wet thud of shoes on hardwood. Nothing. I stared at the floor under his shape. Spotless. Dry. As if rain had never touched him. I froze. My training told me to observe, catalog details, not move until I understood what I was seeing. But there was nothing to catalog. No features, no sound, no trace. He followed her down the hall, and when she returned alone, she looked at me through the glass with a smile too sharp, as if she already knew I was watching. That night I asked her, "Who came by?" "No one," she whispered, smiling. Not a defensive smile, but a knowing one. The days after, I couldn't stop listening for the sound of wet shoes that never came. I'd kneel on the hardwood, pressing my palm flat to feel for moisture, but the board stayed perfectly clean, almost too clean, as if scrubbed by something I couldn't see. I'd check the rugs, the hallway, the doorknob. No trace. Mark called me 2 nights later, his voice strained. "Dave, something weird happened." After we talked, I went to the bathroom. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection lagged. Like it didn't keep up, only for a second. But it bent. I know how it sounds. I closed my eyes, listening to his ragged breathing. "It's spreading." He hung up before I could say more. Carla's shift came next. We were driving through a quiet stretch of town when she cursed suddenly, slamming the brakes. "What?" I shouted, grabbing the dash. She pointed to the windshield. Outside, the street had dissolved into ash, gray flakes swirling, erasing the familiar road. For a second, the world was gone. Nothing but cinders drifting. Then it blinked back. Trees, asphalt, rain. Carla's face was pale. "You saw that, right?" I nodded, throat dry. She didn't mention exhaustion again. At home, the reflections worsened. One night in the kitchen, I saw the figure's hand press against Claire's back in the microwave door. His fingers sank into her skin as though she were clay, indentations forming under the pressure. She didn't flinch. She didn't even notice. The next morning, when she turned away from me, I saw faint depressions along her spine, small scars like something had gripped too tightly. "What's that on your back?" I asked. She glanced over her shoulder. "Smooth skin. Nothing there." "You're imagining things," she said, and left the room. Her cruelty sharpened as the reflections deepened. At dinner, she'd hold my gaze too long, smiling like she was savoring my unraveling. When I tried to touch her, her skin felt colder, corpse-like, the same chill I'd felt lifting bodies into stretchers. I thought smashing the mirror would free me. One night, I raised my fist and drove it into the glass. It cracked but didn't break. The surface rippled like water. My own face stared back, not shocked, not afraid, but grinning. And then it moved without me. My reflection reached out of the glass, its hand gripping mine with familiar strength. The voice that filled my head wasn't hers. It wasn't his. It was mine, layered with something high, metallic, like steel scraping steel. I staggered back from the mirror, blood dripping down my knuckles, the sting sharp but grounding. The glass rippled, but my reflection kept moving independently, its grin widening until the cheek split too far. I wrapped my hand, sat on the floor, and listened to the house breathe around me. Timbers groaning, not like wood, but like a chest straining under smoke, rattling and wet. That night, I lay awake beside Claire, her body still, but the voice in my skull wouldn't stop. Sometimes it used my tone, sometimes a higher metallic pitch, but always layered like echoes in a hollow space. She chose. "You stayed. Now burn." I tried to run again. I dragged my duffel to the front door and yanked until my arms shook. The lock turned, the bolt slid, but the door refused to open. I went to the windows. Outside was no neighborhood, no rain, no trees, only ash. Gray flakes tumbled endlessly against black air, a snowstorm of cinders. The smell hit me like opening a body bag after a house fire. Scorched hair, melted fabric, the acidic tang of burned lungs. I gagged, staggering back. When I pressed my palm to the glass, the cold was unbearable. Not winter cold, morgue cold, corpse cold. Days blurred after that. I went to work, but I wasn't myself. One shift, we picked up a cardiac arrest. Elderly woman collapsed at home. I should have felt the weight of the moment, the urgency. Instead, as Carla and I worked compressions, I couldn't tell if my hands were mine. In the ambulance window, I saw them layered, my pale fingers and another's hand overlapping, guiding. Cold, steady, pressing harder than I would. "David," Carla barked. "You're pushing too fast." But the rhythm wasn't mine. It was the entity's. When we delivered her, she was gone. And for the first time in my career, I felt nothing. No ache, no guilt. Just a numb acceptance, as though I had only followed orders. At home, Claire's cruelty ripened into something unrecognizable. She rarely spoke anymore, but when she did, it was a whisper meant for someone else. Sometimes she'd laugh in the empty kitchen, her gaze flicking past me as though he were standing there, perfectly visible to her. I begged her once. "Claire, please. If you love me at all, tell me what's happening." She looked at me with pity, a thin smile twisting her lips. "It isn't about love, David. It's about who belongs." I couldn't breathe. "Belongs where?" She tilted her head. "In the reflection. In the ash. You'll see." And she turned away, humming softly, a tune I didn't recognize. The house decayed with me. Shadows no longer waited for night. They thickened in daylight, pooling around the edges of rooms like tar. Mirrors grew restless. My reflection twitched, lagged, moved when I stood still. The smell of smoke never left. Every breath tasted faintly metallic, like sucking on coins. I started catching the figure everywhere. Storefront glass, puddles in the street, the chrome bumper of the ambulance. Always standing close, always reaching. Once, while washing my hands at work, my reflection's lips moved without mine. "Ready," it mouthed. "Almost ready," Mark called again weeks later. His voice was shredded. "Dave, I don't know what the fuck you've dragged me into. I saw myself in the bathroom mirror last night and he smiled when I wasn't. He smiled, Dave. I can't." The line went dead. I tried calling back, but his phone rang endlessly, then disconnected. Carla stopped talking to me too. After the ash storm in the ambulance, she grew distant, wary. She wouldn't meet my eyes during shifts. I overheard her telling dispatch she didn't feel safe working doubles with me. The night everything ended began quietly. Claire sat across from me at the dinner table, her fork pausing mid-air, her smile sharp. The air felt heavier than ever, pressing into my chest. Then I heard it, my own voice whispering from the walls. Not from her. Not from me. From the house itself. It whispered my name, stretching the syllables into something jagged. Then another name, low and intimate, spilling from nowhere, curling into my ear like breath. Claire's eyes flicked toward me, and for the first time she laughed out loud. Not cruelly, not sweetly, but with triumph. "You hear it now," she said. The voice filled my skull, louder metallic edges cutting into every word. "Step closer. You're only glass away. Break it. Let us in." I stumbled to the hallway mirror, rage and terror twisting together. I raised my fist again and smashed it. Glass cracked, blood sprayed, but the surface didn't shatter. It rippled and my reflection leaned forward. This time it wasn't grinning. It was calm, almost tender. Its hand reached out, fingers locking around mine, and then it pulled. The sensation was like drowning in cold smoke, lungs collapsing inward. I screamed, but the sound echoed wrong, layered, as though my voice already belonged to someone else. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't remember waking. I just remember opening my eyes in the dark and finding Claire beside me, sleeping peacefully, her hand resting where another hand overlapped in the glass. Now, weeks later, I walk through the world like I'm wearing someone else's skin. My colleagues say I've changed. Carla won't speak to me at all. Even Mark won't return my calls. In the ambulance, I see his hand over mine in the polished metal, cold, guiding, steady. Patients look at me differently now. Some shudder when I touch them as though I've stolen their warmth. One night, we picked up a teenager after a car crash. He was alive when we loaded him in, breathing, eyes wide, clinging to hope. But in the mirrored surface above him, I saw my reflection's hand covering my own, pressing the tube too far, cutting off air. When we reached the hospital, he was gone. Carla screamed at me, shaking, but I couldn't explain. Because the truth is, I didn't make the mistake. I wasn't in control. The entity's voice is no longer separate. It doesn't whisper. It speaks with me as me, and sometimes I can't tell where I end and it begins. At home, Claire hums her strange tune, smiling when she looks at me. I think I finally understand. She never cheated. There was never another man. She only chose. She chose the reflection, the ash, the thing that wears me better than I ever did. The ash outside the window still swirls. I smell it now everywhere, on patients, in the ambulance, on my own skin. Burned hair, melted clothing, a fire that has no origin. Last night in the mirror, I didn't see myself at all. Only him, only us. He leaned forward, mouth opening in perfect sync with mine, and spoke the words I've been dreading and waiting for. "You're finally ready." And I smiled, because I couldn't stop myself, because maybe I was always meant to burn. I knew something was wrong the night I heard him laugh downstairs. It was 12:14 a.m., rain tapping against the windows, and Michael never laughed like that with me anymore. The sound was hushed, conspiratorial, like he'd carried someone else into our home without opening the door. I lay frozen under the covers, the hum of the digital clock glowing red on the nightstand. The laughter carried through the vents, a private joke I wasn't invited into. My stomach clenched. Something about it was familiar and yet foreign. A sound I couldn't place inside the man I thought I knew. I grew up attuned to sounds. My whole childhood was built around anticipating them. The slam of my father's study door, that particular heavy oak thud, meant he was angry. When that door closed, I would sit on the carpet in my room and trace the crack running across my ceiling plaster, waiting for the next noise, the shatter of a glass, my mother's muffled sob. That crack became my anchor, the jagged fault line in white paint. I would whisper to it like a prayer, "Stay in the ceiling, don't come down on me." Even now, decades later, I sometimes catch myself staring at ceilings in rented apartments, searching for cracks like scars that might reopen. My adult life was a porcelain performance. Everything arranged neatly, safely. I worked quietly as a medical billing specialist at Harrington Memorial Hospital in Worcester. 8 to 5, always the same desk, always the same soft whir of printers. My evenings were microwave dinners, true crime reruns, laundry folded in precise stacks. I dated occasionally, but never anyone who made my pulse race. That was the point. No cracks, no slams, no risk. Then came Michael. I met him at a friend's barbecue 2 summers ago, the air sticky with beer and grilled meat. He wasn't supposed to be mine. He had a wife, Anna, the kind of woman I told myself I would never compare to. But he smiled at me across the lawn, asked what I did for work, and when I answered, he said, "You must be good at keeping everything straight." I'd lose my mind in those codes. I laughed harder than the joke deserved because he noticed something in me. Michael was fire. He made me feel visible in a way safety never had. His hands lingered too long when he passed me a drink. His text came at midnight when Anna was asleep, and eventually I stopped resisting. I told myself passion mattered more than guilt, that Anna didn't need him like I did. When he moved in with me months later, I believed it was proof that love could outweigh betrayal. But the house never settled. At first, it was small things. Lights flickering, the hall colder than the rest of the house, the sense of being watched from corners where no one stood. I chalked it up to old wiring, poor insulation. But deep down, I remembered that crack in my childhood ceiling, the one that never healed. That night of the laughter, I lay awake until silence returned. When Michael came upstairs, I pretended to sleep. He smelled faintly, not of cologne or sweat, but of damp earth and something sweet, metallic, like pennies pressed to the tongue. The days that followed unfolded strangely. His reflection in the bathroom mirror lagged by a fraction of a second. His fork moved to his mouth before his mirrored self caught up. I laughed it off at first, convinced it was my exhaustion, but when I looked again, the reflection seemed to watch me with a sharper hunger than the man sitting across from me. At dinner one night, I noticed he chewed, but didn't taste. He moved food around his mouth like it was fuel, not flavor. I asked if he liked it, and he said, "Of course it's perfect," though he hadn't swallowed yet. His smile froze too long on his face, as though holding the expression for my benefit. I began to dread small domestic rituals. The clink of his coffee spoon, the creak of the stair when he rose at night. They were familiar but wrong, carrying echoes I couldn't name. Then came the outside whispers. Mrs. Collins, our neighbor across the street, caught me on the porch one morning as I carried trash out. Her gray hair was wound in curlers, her robe flapping in the wind. She lowered her voice like she was afraid of being overheard. "I've seen him," she said. "Your husband, out late?" "Not alone." Her eyes darted over my shoulder at the house as if it might eavesdrop. "You should be careful, dear." I swallowed hard, muttered thanks, and hurried back inside, but her words crawled into my skin. That night I couldn't sleep, straining for the sound of the oak door slam from years ago, though it never came. A week later, Jenna from work cornered me near the break room. Her expression was hesitant, pitying. "Rachel, I don't know if I should tell you this," I braced myself. "I saw Michael on Walnut Street." "With someone?" My throat tightened. "With who?" She shook her head. I couldn't see her face. It was raining, but she carried flowers. Lilies, I think. The white kind you see at funerals. The words hollowed me out. Lilies, Anna's favorite. I remembered the wedding photos Michael kept in a shoebox. Her bouquet was nothing but lilies. I'd hidden that photo months ago, burying it at the back of the closet. That night when I came upstairs, the photo sat on our nightstand. Damp. Cold. My breath caught. I shoved it back into the closet, deeper this time, but the next morning it reappeared. Damp again, droplets trailing onto the wood. Then came the perfume. A faint trail of Chanel No. 5 clung to the bedspread, the same scent Anna had worn at the barbecue where I first met her. It wasn't mine. I hadn't bought perfume in years. The smell curled around me like an accusation, and then, the mirror. I stumbled into the bathroom one morning, eyes puffy from restless sleep. Across the fogged glass, in an elegant looping script unmistakably feminine, were the words, "He is not yours." He never was. It was her handwriting. I knew it in my bones. I'd seen it on the notes she left Michael, the labels on spice jars that lingered when he moved out of her house. A steady, practiced hand, not mine. I wiped it away, trembling, but the steam returned that evening and the words re-etched themselves, perfect and patient. Michael laughed when I told him. "Rachel, you're overtired. You need rest." He touched my cheek with hands that smelled faintly of earth, of pennies. "You're seeing what you want to see, but I didn't want this. I wanted safety, porcelain routines, the illusion of peace. Instead, I had whispers in the walls, perfume on my sheets, and a photograph that refused to stay buried. And Michael's laugh. Always Michael's laugh, carrying through the house like a promise of something I couldn't escape. I began counting the days by disturbances. Not by calendars, not by billing cycles at work, but by the things that moved, appeared, or whispered when I was alone. Day 1. The perfume lingered strongest in our bedroom, clinging to my pillow. Day 2. The wedding photograph reappeared damp again, though I'd shoved it into a box taped shut. Day 3. Michael's reflection smiled at me in the hallway mirror, even when his real face didn't. I stopped turning on the bathroom light at night, afraid of what words I'd find written in the steam. I caught myself flinching when Michael brushed past me, his skin cool to the touch as if he'd been standing outside in the rain for hours. He ate silently, swallowed without tasting. He never mentioned the laugh. He never admitted the whispers. I started to avoid him, finding excuses to stay late at work. But avoidance only left me lonelier, more vulnerable to the house itself. The walls creaked with sighs when I sat alone. Sometimes the air carried the faint rhythmic scrape of nails against wood, coming from inside the plaster. Mrs. Collins knocked one evening, her face drawn, hands trembling. "You need to leave." "Dear," she whispered, "that man isn't who you think." I tried to smile, thanked her for her concern, but my throat closed. She pressed a rosary into my hand before leaving. I tucked it into my dresser drawer, ashamed I wanted its weight. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I woke at 3 in the morning to find Michael sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. His back was hunched, shoulders rigid. "Michael?" My voice cracked. He turned slowly, too slowly. His eyes reflected the faint glow of the clock like mirrors. He grinned, but the grin stretched too far, skin tight around teeth that seemed too sharp. I gasped, scrambling backward. Then, as if nothing had happened, his face reset. "Normal, human. What's wrong, Rachel?" he asked softly, but I couldn't answer. That day, I called in sick to work. I couldn't leave the house, not because I wanted to stay, but because some force seemed to bind me here. When I opened the front door, the air pressed against me like water. I slammed it shut, lungs burning. The disturbances escalated. The smell of formaldehyde, sickly sweet and chemical, drifted from the basement door at night. Damp stains bloomed along the baseboards, spreading in shapes like hands. The wedding photograph appeared again and again, each time wetter, until the wood beneath it warped, and Anna's presence grew undeniable. I found strands of long, dark hair on the bathroom sink, though mine was cropped short. The mirror words repeated, but now in variations. "He chose me. You can't have him, he is mine," always in that looping, elegant script. The final straw was the whisper in my ear while I stood alone in the kitchen. "Rachel." It was Anna's voice, unmistakable, heavy with contempt. I dropped the glass I was holding, watched it shatter across the tiles, and knew I couldn't avoid the basement any longer. That night, Michael rose again. I pretended to sleep until the stairs groaned under his weight. Then I followed. The basement door yawned open. The smell of wet earth and chemicals slapped me in the face, metallic and sweet like rot preserved. I descended slowly, each step echoing. The basement looked different. The air shimmered, damp concrete slick under my feet. At the far end, under the weak light bulb, stood Michael, and beside him, her Anna. Her skin hung in loose folds, gray and waterlogged. One finger was missing from her left hand, the wedding ring clutched tightly in the other. Her eyes were bottomless sockets, yet they fixed on me with unmistakable rage. Her mouth opened, voice ragged yet precise. "You're next." The door slammed behind me. The lock groaned, metal grinding like a mouth chewing. I lunged, but Michael blocked my path. His face melted into something unrecognizable, eyes inverted, reflecting the light inward. Teeth long and translucent like insect mandibles. His body bent wrong, joints creaking as if they'd been soaked in water too long. "Stay," he whispered, voice layered. Not just his, but many. "You belong here," I screamed, pounded the door, but the air thickened around me. Anna pointed, the wet ring glinting. My breath faltered, lungs burning. Then, the bulb above flickered and burst. Darkness swallowed everything. When I opened my eyes, I was outside. Rain lashed my face, my feet raw against asphalt. Neighbors peered from their windows, eyes wide with horror, as though they'd seen me rise from something unholy. I never went back. But escape was an illusion. Now I live in a rented room across town. The paint peels, the radiator clanks, the landlord doesn't ask questions. I keep the lights on at night, yet Anna finds me anyway. She stares from mirrors. At first, only her face, her dark hair damp, her mouth curved in a smile. But then I noticed the smile didn't move when the lips did. Her reflection grinned, but her mouth stayed still, frozen. My phone rings at odd hours. Jenna tells me she gets calls from me, where all she hears is Anna's ragged breathing. Mrs. Collins stopped answering the door after claiming I'd visited late one night. Though I hadn't left my room, I'm unraveling. People at work whisper. My boss warned me about absences. But how do I explain that my own life has been hijacked? That Anna is speaking through me, borrowing my voice, calling my friends. Some nights I wake to find words scrawled on the walls of my rented room. Come home. I try to resist. I clutch the rosary. I sleep with the lights burning. But resistance only deepens the isolation. No one believes me now. No one sees me except her. And maybe that's what I wanted all along, someone to see me. To notice me. Michael once gave me that, but it was never real. It belonged to her. Now when I close my eyes, I hear Michael's laugh again, carried in the walls of this dingy room. It no longer frightens me. It comforts me in its way. A promise I've stopped fighting. Tomorrow I will go back to the house. Not in fear, but in submission. I think the only way to silence this fracture in me, the porcelain that's already cracked, is to return to where it all began. Perhaps when I walk down into the basement again, Anna will be waiting. Perhaps Michael will smile with his too many teeth. Perhaps they will welcome me and the house will finally close its door. I don't want safety anymore. I want peace, and I know now there's only one way to find it. I never knew the sound of betrayal could have a weight, until I heard my husband laugh softly into his phone. It wasn't just laughter. It was a tone he hadn't used with me in years. Something private, something rehearsed. As if he had borrowed joy from another life and hidden it from mine. My name is Claire Blake, 34 years old, and I have spent most of my life in the quiet corridors of Cambridge, Massachusetts. I teach English at Westbridge High, tucked into a brick building that smells of chalk and rain-soaked coats. My days are built from rhythm. Bells ringing, pages turning, familiar students raising the same questions about novels I've taught a dozen times. My life was patterned, safe, even dull. I thought marriage was the same, a threadbare quilt, worn but warm enough. But on October 14th, 2023, a storm-heavy Thursday night, the pattern cracked. I'd gone upstairs early, nursing a headache that pulsed behind my eyes. I meant to sleep, but the sound stopped me, the low murmur of my husband Andrew's voice rising from the kitchen below. Then came that laugh. My chest tightened. It was not the laugh he gave me. It was younger, freer, edged with something intimate. I lay there, listening, my breath shallow. Then I heard it. A name I didn't recognize, whispered like a prayer. My stomach hollowed. I should have gone back to sleep. I should have told myself it was nothing, just late-night work calls. But suspicion is not something you can fold away neatly. It carves into you, reshaping every thought. From that night on, the house itself seemed to change. Shadows stretched too far across the walls as though the light didn't know where to end. Floorboards groaned as if under weight, though I walked alone. Some nights, while washing dishes, I heard the faint echo of my husband's voice in the empty dining room, murmuring endearments to no one I could see. Andrew's phone stayed locked now. His eyes didn't meet mine. He began leaving at odd hours, claiming errands, returning with the faint smell of damp earth and iron clinging to his clothes. It wasn't perfume, but it carried the intimacy of a secret. One evening, I confided in our neighbor, Mark. He was a quiet man, a widower who always raked his leaves into neat piles no matter the weather. I asked casually if he had noticed Andrew out late. Mark hesitated, then leaned closer. "I saw him near the Everett Mill," he whispered. He wasn't alone. The Everett Mill had been abandoned for decades, its red brick shell crouching on the edge of town, windows shattered, roof sagging. Teenagers dared each other to break in, but adults avoided it. I hadn't thought of the place in years. When I asked Andrew, he laughed, sharp, humorless. "You're imagining things, Claire." But there was something in his eyes, something hollow. Nights grew unbearable. I woke to find him standing at the foot of our bed watching me. His eyes were wide, too still, unblinking in the dark. Then he'd crawl back under the covers without a word. His skin grew cold against mine. When he kissed me, it was like pressing my lips to something lifeless. I told myself it was stress. Marriage goes through cycles. Maybe I was inventing monsters. But the house disagreed. The air thickened with silence that felt weighted, as though another presence filled the rooms. The mirrors in our hallway began to warp my reflection, just slightly, like water trembling, but always when I was alone. The breaking point came the night I followed him. It was nearly midnight when he slipped out, keys clutched tight. I waited until I heard the car pull away, then grabbed my coat. The rain sliced through the windshield as I trailed him, heart hammering louder than the wipers. He drove straight to the Everett Mill, its dark shell looming against the lightning-punctured sky. I parked a street away and crept closer, shoes sinking into mud. Inside the mill's cracked doorway, dim light flickered from somewhere deep within, and there he was. Andrew stood in the open space, rain dripping through holes in the roof. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood something that looked like a man but shimmered wrong, as though reality itself recoiled from his outline. His face shifted, a surface of liquid oil, never settling, never allowing the eye to rest, and my husband turned to him. His voice layered, doubled, as if two throats spoke at once. "She's beginning to suspect." They both looked at me. The thing smiled through my husband's mouth. I ran. I don't remember the drive home, only the storm following me, slamming branches against the car, chasing me into the hollowed-out silence of our house. Since that night, nothing is the same. Every mirror shows not my face but his, Andrew's, but with lips moving in silence, laughing at something only he can hear. Some nights the phone rings, and I hear my husband's voice speaking softly, intimately, but never to me. I don't know if the man I married is alive, or if he ever was, and every night I wonder if the voice I loved is still his, or if it has always belonged to something else. I should have left him. The night I saw Andrew with that thing, when his mouth carried two voices, I should have packed a bag and vanished into the rain. But marriages don't dissolve like glass dropped from a shelf. They stretch, warp, hold together even when they should break. Fear is a kind of glue. The morning after the mill, Andrew made coffee as if nothing had happened. His face looked normal, but his eyes lingered too long, too still. His voice was his again, soft, measured. "You didn't sleep well," he said. I wanted to scream, to demand what I'd seen, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I nodded, hands trembling around the mug. The coffee tasted faintly of soil. I told myself maybe I'd imagined it. The storm, the shadows, the sleeplessness. But denial phrased quickly. The house began to betray him, or betray me. At night, I'd hear Andrew's laugh echoing in the attic, though he was beside me in bed. The laugh would cut off abruptly, leaving silence so heavy it pressed against my ribs. Sometimes while grading papers at the kitchen table, I'd catch his reflection in the window, except it wasn't synchronized. His hand would rise a moment too late, his head turned slower, as though the glass remembered him differently. I stopped sleeping. My colleagues noticed the dark circles under my eyes. I brushed them off with lies about migraines. Mark, the neighbor, asked once if I was all right. I almost told him everything. But his wife had died only a year ago. His grief was fresh, raw. I couldn't hand him mine. Andrew grew colder. Literally. His skin was clammy, cool even fresh from the shower. When I kissed him, I felt no warmth. He stopped blinking as often, watching me with the patience of a predator. One evening, I heard him in the garage whispering. I pressed my ear to the door. His voice wavered, layered again, as if something else spoke through him. Then silence. When I opened the door, he stood there alone, smiling faintly, a wrench dangling from his hand. "Looking for something?" he asked. His tone was gentle, but his knuckles were white around the tool. I backed away. He laughed, that hollow, stolen laugh, and brushed past me. I began to write everything down as if notes could prove my sanity. The date, the sound, the reflection, the smell of iron on his breath. But the notebook itself betrayed me. Some mornings words I hadn't written appeared between my lines. He belongs to us. You will too. I tore out the pages, burned them in the sink. The smoke smelled sweet like anise and rust. The climax came weeks later. Andrew left again late, saying he had to meet a student struggling with coursework. His eyes didn't waver. But I knew. I followed him once more. This time he didn't drive to the mill, he walked. Through rain-slick alleys, past shuttered storefronts to the edge of the river. There, under the skeletal frame of an old bridge, I saw them. Andrew stood with the thing. It was clearer now, less human, more shape than body. Its skin rippled like liquid metal. Its face flickered through dozens of versions, Andrew's, Mark's, strangers, mine. And when Andrew spoke, their voices overlapped perfectly. One sound made from two throats. She resists, Andrew whispered. She watches. The thing tilted its head and I felt it notice me. Even across the river, even hidden in shadow, I felt its gaze slide under my skin. I ran. Again. Always running. When I reached home, Andrew was already there, sitting calmly at the kitchen table. His clothes were dry. His phone lay unlocked in front of him, but the screen showed only static, lines of shifting symbols I couldn't read. "Why are you afraid of me, Claire?" he asked softly. "Haven't I always loved you?" His smile was kind, but his eyes were black glass. That night I locked myself in the guest room. I pressed a chair against the door, trembling. At some point I must have slept. When I woke, the chair was gone, the door wide open. Andrew stood in the doorway, watching. "You talk in your sleep," he said. "You say my name." "But not mine alone," I screamed. He didn't move. His smile didn't falter. Days blur now. I stopped going to work. My phone rings at night, always from unknown numbers. When I answer, it's Andrew's voice, whispering sweet things he hasn't said to me in years. But layered beneath it is another tone, low, metallic, vibrating in my bones. The mirrors no longer show me. They show her, my face, but not mine. Her lips move, forming words I can't hear. Sometimes she laughs softly, the way Andrew laughed that first night. I don't know what's real anymore. Did I ever know him? Was Andrew ever just a man, or has he always been a hollow vessel for something else? Last night I woke to find him sitting on the edge of the bed. He leaned close, breath cold as winter stone, and whispered into my ear. His words were not words, but I understood them anyway. "It's your turn now." Now I write this with shaking hands. If anyone finds these words, know that love can rot. It can be borrowed, stolen, reshaped into something that wears a familiar face. The phone is ringing again. I hear his voice, soft, intimate, never meant for me, and I think I might answer. I still remember the exact night I found the messages. October 3rd, 2022. The house was quiet, the autumn wind rattling loose branches against the siding, and I was sitting in the dim glow of my laptop. But those weren't the first messages I read. Those were the ones he found later. The first messages were mine. It started because I couldn't stand the silence anymore. 10 years of marriage had trained me into a rhythm, but rhythms become cages when you realize the beat will never change. Every Sunday morning, Mark brewed the same pot of coffee. He measured the grounds with careful precision, filled the filter, poured the water, and set 2 mugs on the table. He always pushed the sugar toward me, though I hadn't used sugar in years. Then we'd sit, him reading the newspaper, me scrolling through my phone, the air full of the hum of the refrigerator and nothing else. No words, no questions, just the same tired routine that felt less like comfort and more like suffocation. Tuesday nights were worse. We'd collapse into the couch after dinner, some mindless TV flickering across our faces. He always reached for my hand halfway through the second show, more out of obligation than desire. I gave it to him anyway, though it felt like holding a glove filled with warm sand. We'd sit there, the house perfectly still, and I'd wonder if I'd ever feel alive again. The promotions, the dinner parties, the house on Birch Hollow, none of it filled me. If anything, each achievement felt like another brick mortared into place around me. I had what people envied, and it meant nothing. My coworkers clapped when I was named partner at the law firm, but the applause echoed against a cavern inside me. What no one saw was that I'd been running for years, from the gnawing fear that I was becoming invisible, aging into a woman who could vanish in plain sight. And no one would notice until the chair at the breakfast table stayed empty too long. I began writing emails to no one. Drafts that I never sent. Pages filled with confessions I didn't dare speak aloud. I feel hollow. I don't know who I am anymore. I dream of a voice calling me from the dark. At first, the drafts sat unsent, locked away in a folder like spilled secrets. But one night, when I opened the folder again, the words I'd written had shifted. Not much. Just a phrase here, a sentence there, like someone had been editing me. You are not alone. The words weren't mine, and yet they pulsed on the screen, alive. I froze, staring at them, my heart beating so fast I thought the laptop itself might hear. For days I tried to type replies, but the messages always slipped into something else. My fingers hovered, trembling as though the keys belonged to someone else. It was weeks before the name appeared. I didn't write it, not consciously. I sat down one night, exhausted and shaking, and when I looked up, there it was at the top of the email draft, to Darren. The name felt foreign, sharp. I didn't know where it came from. But it stayed, and once it was there, it was impossible to erase. At first, Darren was only words that soothed me. He told me he understood the hunger, the emptiness, the mask I wore each day. He told me I was seen, that the hollow space inside me wasn't a defect, it was a doorway. But words don't stay words for long. The first time I noticed something wrong in the house, it was small. My wristwatch had moved. It wasn't just misplaced, it was sitting in the bathroom sink, face up, ticking. I picked it up and froze. The second hand twitched, but the time was frozen at 3:07 a.m. No matter how many times I wound it, it always returned to 3:07. The second time, it was my shoes. I found them neatly lined on Mark's side of the closet, soles damp as though I'd walked through dew. Mark frowned when he saw them, but he didn't ask. That was his way. Better to let questions rot unsaid than risk breaking the glass surface of our life. Then came the smells. Not rust and roses, not yet. Something subtler. A metallic sweetness like blood diluted in old perfume. It clung to my blouse when I came home late. I told him I'd been at the office, though I could see in his eyes he didn't believe me. The silence of the house grew heavier, thick as cloth draped over my ears. Sometimes it wasn't silence at all. It was a hum that pressed into the bones of my skull, a sound too low to hear but impossible not to feel. The first night I heard the whisper, I thought it was Mark talking in his sleep. I followed the sound into the kitchen and saw nothing but dark cabinets and the gleam of the faucet. The voice said a name I didn't recognize. Not Darren, not Mark. Something older, syllables too heavy for air. When I returned to bed, Mark stirred and asked if I was awake. I told him no. Mark's suspicion grew slowly. He began watching me the way a man watches shadows across the lawn, hoping they're only trees, knowing they're not. He checked my phone when he thought I wasn't looking. He lingered at the office door when I stayed late. His eyes followed me with something between love and fear. But love doesn't save you when the hunger has already chosen. The motel on Ashbury Road was never mine, but I dreamed of it before I went. Cracked blinds, mildew-stained carpet, wallpaper curling like skin. I knew he would follow me, and I wanted him to. Not because I wanted to be caught, but because I wanted him to see, to finally understand. The storm that night rattled the car as I drove. Each flash of lightning illuminated the street signs, the letters blurring into unreadable symbols. By the time I reached the motel, my body buzzed with something alive and terrible. Inside the room, I knelt in the dark. The air pulsed thick as breath. The shadows rippled, waiting. My reflection in the mirror grinned at me, though my mouth was still, and then it moved, lips forming the name, not Darren, not the safe syllables of my messages, but the true word that lived beneath language. When I opened my eyes, I knew he was outside. Mark, his face pale in the window, his hands shaking as he clutched a rain-soaked receipt from the motel desk. He didn't knock. He didn't come in. He only stared, horror carved into his features until the lightning blinded us both. When I returned home later, he was already there. He sat on the couch, drenched, trembling, the receipt clutched in his fist, ink smeared into nothing. I smiled and asked why he was late. I offered him tea. He said nothing, only stared at me with eyes I no longer recognized. Mark stopped speaking to me after that night at the motel. At first, it was only silence stretched too long across the table, or the pause before he answered a question. Then it became avoidance. He moved through the house like a ghost, his footsteps soft, as if afraid to disturb something already awake. I should have missed him. I should have felt the loss of our conversations, our routines. But the truth was I felt lighter. The silence gave me room to breathe, to listen to the hum beneath the house, to feel Darren more closely. Mark began sleeping in the den. I woke one night to find his pillow gone, his side of the bed untouched, cold. I padded through the dark hallways until I found him curled on the couch, the television glowing faint blue across his pale face. His eyes were open, unblinking. "Come to bed," I whispered. He didn't answer. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. I leaned closer, and only then did I hear it. Not my name, not Darren's. A question, "Who's watching the house?" His voice cracked like glass. I drew back, startled. His gaze didn't shift to me. It stayed fixed on the hallway, on the black crack beneath the basement door. The basement became his obsession. Every evening I found him standing there, staring at the door as though it might open itself. He placed chairs against it, then the dining table. Once I woke to find him dragging the refrigerator across the floor, sweat streaming down his face as he wedged it against the frame. "There's nothing down there," I told him. But he shook his head, eyes wide, pupils blown. "It's waiting." His hands trembled constantly now. He checked locks, then checked them again, then checked them a third time until the key slipped from his shaking fingers. His lips moved in a silent litany, muttering to someone I couldn't hear. I began to pity him, not because he was wrong, but because he was too fragile to understand. He thought Darren was outside, pressing against the walls, waiting to come in. He didn't realize Darren had always been here, that he had always been me. The house itself began to change. The grain of the wood floors shifted when I wasn't looking. The shadows beneath the dining table thickened into an absolute black, darker than night, swallowing the space between chair legs. Sometimes, in the mirror above the mantel, I saw myself tilt my head before I actually moved. The smell grew heavier, metal and sweetness, like a jar of pennies drowned in perfume. Mark noticed but pretended not to. He ate little, barely slept, his cheeks hollowing until he looked carved from wax. One evening I found him at the kitchen table with the laptop open. Not my emails, a blank document. Across the page in jagged lines he had typed his own name, over and over, hundreds of times filling the screen. "Mark," I said softly. He looked up at me, tears streaking his face, his throat working as though he wanted to speak, but no words came. Only a shuddering breath like his lungs had forgotten how. The last night was a storm again. Wind tearing branches from trees, rain slamming the windows. I woke to find the bed empty, the den empty, the house silent. I followed the silence until I saw him. He stood in the hallway directly before the basement door, his hand hovering over the knob. His lips moved rapidly, whispering to the crack of darkness below. "What is waiting down there?" His voice shook. "What do you want?" I stepped behind him, my feet soundless on the floor. I reached out, touched his shoulder. He turned, and the scream that left him was not sound. It was absence, a choking, airless gasp. His mouth stretched wide, but no noise emerging. His body convulsed as though struck by lightning. His eyes rolled white. I steadied him, my hands firm on his arms, and for one long moment we stood together, caught between silence and storm. Then his body sagged, trembling, barely holding itself upright. He was almost gone. After that night, Mark was no longer my husband. He wandered the house in blank routines, moving chairs that didn't need moving, typing words that made no sense, muttering to walls that breathed when no one touched them. I watched him from the couch, pity curdling into something colder. He was unraveling, and I was steady, sharper than I had ever been. I no longer feared the silence, I welcomed it. I whispered Darren's name, not into the air, but into the foundation of the house, into the cracks in the plaster, into the hum that thrummed like a second heartbeat beneath the floor. And sometimes, the house whispered back. The end came quietly. I found him one morning at the table again, the laptop open in front of him. But this time it wasn't his name repeated across the screen. It was mine. Lauren. 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 The letters filled every corner, black blocks of text climbing like ivy. He sat rigid, his face pale, his lips cracked. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring through me into something far beyond. His finger tapped the key again and again, the letters spilling endlessly. Lauren. I touched his shoulder. He didn't flinch this time. He only looked at me with a hollow sorrow, as if pitying me instead. I leaned close, and for the first time, I pitied him back because I knew what he couldn't say. Lauren was already gone. The walls of the house breathe. Not dampness, not rust, not roses. They exhale something warm, metallic, sweet. Each inhale draws closer. Each exhale shapes my name, syllable by syllable. And I know now that I was never hollow. The hunger was always waiting, patient, inevitable. The house whispers my name and I whisper back. I always thought marriage meant safety. That illusion shattered the night I heard my husband whisper another woman's name in his sleep. I built my life on order. Not control exactly, but precision. The small invisible arrangements that made me feel steady in a world that had never been kind to me. My mornings began with the gentle hum of the transcription machine on my desk, its keys clattering in rhythm with the doctor's recorded voice. Medical reports, clean and factual, dictated in clipped tones, entered my ears and left through my fingers, every phrase stamped neatly into the world through words. I liked the way the cursor blinked, waiting for me, never impatient but expectant, as though the order of someone's illness or recovery depended on my consistency. Papers stacked perfectly. Pens aligned in a single row, caps tight. The little green lamp on the desk polished every weekend so its shade gleamed like still water. My headphones fit snug, muting everything but the even cadence of medicine and procedure. I wasn't important, but I was precise, and precision was its own quiet refuge. Daniel had been the interruption to all of that. A welcome one at first. He was bold where I was silent. He walked into rooms with laughter too loud, stories too long, his hand gesturing wildly as if the air itself might collapse without his direction. He was the flame that made my steady world glow. He'd pull me away from my desk, insisting on sudden drives to no place in particular. A midnight diner 2 towns over, or a Sunday road trip with no map. I thought his chaos was a kind of safety too. Something to rely on because it was always the same, unpredictable but vibrant, full of life. But then came the night I heard him whisper, Elise. The name was soft, warm on his lips in the dark while I lay beside him. He smiled in his sleep, his body shifting toward mine, but the name wasn't mine. The first signs were small, so small I told myself I was inventing them. His phone on the counter face down, a text alert he dismissed too quickly, his eyes sliding from mine when I asked, a perfume clinging faintly to his shirt when he came home late. Not my perfume. It wasn't until I tried to identify it that my stomach began to twist. I was never one for fragrances, but curiosity drove me online, typing descriptions into search bars, floral, sharp, something both sweet and chemical. I landed on a name that came close, Night Bloom, a perfume supposedly discontinued in the 1990s, written about on old blogs and fragrance forums with longing. Some claimed it was too heady, too artificial, smelling like roses left too long in water. But there were no bottles for sale, not anywhere, nothing current. Yet I smelled it on Daniel's clothes every week. The earth came next. Damp, loamy, the kind of smell that clings after rain-soaked soil has been disturbed. It crept into the bedroom even when the windows were sealed. I found the first stain on the sheets one early morning, a smear of mud where Daniel had lain. I touched it with 2 fingers, rubbed them together expecting grit. But it wasn't grit. It was fine, almost clay-like. And in it, caught in the fibers of the sheet, was a stone. Smooth, perfectly round, white like bleached bone. Later I found another, then 2. Then a trail of them, barely noticeable, leading toward the bathroom. Once, instead of stones, it was beetles, black and glossy, their shells glimmering faintly even in the dim light. I swept them into a tissue, heart racing, but when I went to flush them, the tissue was empty. Daniel laughed when I mentioned it. "You're overworked, Elle. You're seeing bugs where there aren't any." But he never offered to change the sheets himself. The mirror was my undoing. I was brushing my teeth when I caught it, the corner of my mouth tugging into a smile, though my lips were still. For a second it was subtle enough to dismiss. But then the reflection whispered something I couldn't hear, its lips forming a name. Elise. The sound wasn't in the air. It was in my bones. crawling up from marrow to skull. My toothbrush clattered against the sink. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles whitened. The reflection smiled wide, too wide, and only after a few seconds did it realign with me. I pressed my back to the bathroom wall, shaking. That night I whispered my own name out loud, over and over. Elena, Elena, Elena. As if the sound might anchor me, might prove I still belonged here. But in the quiet, I almost said Elise. I tried to reach out. To Mark, Daniel's closest friend. We sat across from each other at the small diner near Walnut Street, the formica table sticky beneath our elbows. "You're tired, El," he said, stirring his coffee absently. "You're making shadows into monsters." I know him. He'd never— Mark, I stopped. What was I supposed to say? That I'd watched my own reflection mouth a stranger's name? That I'd found stones in the bed like something buried was clawing through to reach me? He shook his head. "You're unraveling. Just talk to him. Don't let your head fill in blanks that aren't there." But the blanks were all I could see. Mrs. Heller was worse. Our neighbor for years, sharp-eyed, kind enough to check in when Daniel's car wasn't in the drive. She came to the door one evening, her lips tight. "I saw Daniel's wife last night," she said, walking Walnut Street, but her eyes darted past me into the house. "It wasn't you, Elena." Her words were heavy, final. Before I could press, she made an excuse, retreating quickly to her own porch. Within days, her curtains were drawn tight. I knocked once, twice, but she didn't answer. At night, I thought I heard rattling from her windows, like the glass itself was shaking against the frame. By the end of the week, a moving truck sat in her driveway. She was gone by morning, the house whispered. Not always, not loud, but if I pressed my ear against the walls, the sound was there. A dry rasp like sand being poured slowly through a funnel. Sometimes it shifted, catching on the edges of words in a language I couldn't know. The longer I listened, the more it filled me. Once I swore I felt it inside my lungs, grains of sand piling in my chest as if the house itself wanted to choke me. The mirrors lagged more each day. Sometimes they froze entirely, my reflection watching the door while I stared at myself. Sometimes they cried when I didn't, the glass streaked with tears I hadn't shed. Daniel never noticed, or pretended not to. His humming filled the silence at night, low and strange. When he kissed me, I tasted roses and soil. I am Elena Whitaker. But sometimes in the mirror, I see Elise smiling back, and she is winning. I thought if I ignored it, it might fade. That was the lie I told myself as October uncoiled around me, each night colder, each morning slower to light. But the house was no longer mine. The air shifted when I walked through rooms. The floorboards creaked as if unseen weight pressed them. My own name began to feel like a costume I had forgotten how to wear. When Daniel spoke, I sometimes caught myself straining for another syllable, waiting for him to say Elise. And when he didn't, when he called me Elle or Elena, it felt borrowed, like a line in a play we were both forgetting. The mirrors mocked me worst of all. One morning, brushing my hair in the bathroom, I watched my reflection blink a second too late. Its pupils dilated slowly, unnaturally, like the camera aperture of some mechanical eye. And then when I looked away, I caught it staring at the door instead of me, waiting. The whispers in the walls had grown bolder, a constant undercurrent. Sand sliding, dry and choking. When I pressed my ear too long, my throat would tighten, coughing as though the grit had reached my lungs. Daniel didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and he chose silence. He grew restless, humming tunes I didn't recognize. At dinner, he tapped his fingers in rhythms that made my skin crawl, staggered beats too precise like coded messages. The scent of roses followed him everywhere. Not fresh roses, but the kind that rot in water, turning sour, almost metallic. When I asked where he'd been, he smiled too widely. With coworkers. You know how it is, but I didn't. I had no coworkers who left mud in my sheets, no friends who whispered names into the dark. The night it broke was October 12, 2023. Cold rain glazed the pavement, streetlights humming like dying insects. Daniel said he was going out. His eyes didn't meet mine when he kissed my cheek and his breath was damp with earth. I followed, my hands locked on the steering wheel so tightly the skin at my cuticles split. He walked fast, shoulders hunched against the rain, cutting through downtown until he reached the Fairview Hotel. The building should have been empty. Its windows were dark, boarded, half broken. It hadn't hosted guests in decades, abandoned to rot on the corner like a corpse propped in a chair. But Daniel slipped through its front doors as if it had been waiting for him. I hesitated only seconds before I followed. The smell hit me first. Rust and roses. The air was thick with it. Metallic sweetness over decay. Wallpaper peeled in damp curls, streaked black with mold. The carpet gave beneath my shoes, squelching as though soaked in something thicker than water. The lobby was wrong. The space stretched too far, doors too many. Shadows clung to the corners, not the normal gray of dim light, but oily, rippling, alive. I trailed Daniel down a hallway that bent too soon, then too late, stretching into impossible angles. Doors repeated, the same numbers, 203, 203, 203. Each brass plate tarnished differently, but the same. My breath grew shallow, every inhale dragging rust into my lungs. I reached one door and opened it, only to step back into the same hallway. Another and another. Always the same corridor, doors multiplying, angles collapsing in on themselves, and then, faintly I heard him, Daniel's voice, soft and reverent, rising from below. The ballroom. I found the staircase and descended into stale air. The doors groaned when I pushed them open. Inside, the space yawned too wide, ceilings disappearing into darkness, chandeliers swaying though no wind stirred. Daniel was there, kneeling, but he was not alone. A figure towered over him, draped in shadows that pulsed like smoke. Its edges blurred, but at its core something gleamed. A shard of obsidian or a nest of whirring metallic fibers flickering with impossible light. Its hands, long, thin, jointed too many times, curled around him like roots slick with water. Daniel tilted his face up, lips pressed against where its mouth should have been. "Elise," he whispered, and the figure leaned closer, its head turning toward me though it had no face. Daniel smiled. Not his smile. Something borrowed, stretched too wide, teeth too sharp. I ran. The hallways collapsed around me, looping, folding. Doors slammed open to reveal not rooms but endless corridors, stretching into voids of shadow. The whispers filled the air now, no longer faint but deafening, choking, each syllable a grain of sand forced into my lungs. I stumbled, slammed into walls that weren't there a second ago. My reflection flashed in each brass plate on the doors. Dozens of Elena's smiling Elise smiles back at me, whispering my stolen name. When I finally burst through the entrance, rain soaking me, I looked back. The hotel was gone. The lot was empty, choked with weeds and broken glass as if the building had been swallowed whole. Weeks have passed. Daniel still comes home at night, but he hums songs that don't exist, tunes that make my teeth ache. His eyes are darker each day, light drained as if something inside him is pulling it away. The sheets reek of roses and soil. Smooth white stones sometimes roll against my skin when I wake. Other times black beetles scatter when I pull back the covers, their shells clicking, vanishing before I can catch them. The mirrors no longer wait. They move when I don't. They cry when I sleep. Sometimes I wake to find them watching the door, as if waiting for someone else to arrive. When Daniel kisses me, the taste is damp earth and rosewater. It clings to the back of my throat no matter how much I drink, how much I scrub. I no longer pray for safety. Safety was the lie. I turn off the lights each night. Let the house breathe its whispers into me. I no longer fight when the reflection mouths Elise. I no longer flinch when Daniel's humming fills the dark, because maybe this is the only order left. The only precision. The merging of what I am and what I was never meant to be. When he leans over me in the dark now, whispering, "The name is no longer foreign. It belongs to me." I never wanted to look through that window. It began with fog, not the kind that rolls in from the Hudson on fall mornings, heavy and gray, but something stranger, something intimate. A bloom of condensation that rose across the kitchen window only when I stood before it, as if my own breath carried through the glass from the wrong side. It was late September, an ordinary Tuesday. Samuel was still at school. Faculty meetings always stretched past dusk. I filled the kettle, leaned against the counter, and noticed it. A delicate veil forming across the panes, swelling outward like skin drawn tight. I pressed my hand against the cool surface. Warmth met me. Not sunlight warmth, not radiator warmth, but the unmistakable feel of body heat. Something living pressed against me. Then the smell came, thick and nauseating. Anise, damp soil, the metallic sting of iron. It filled my throat until I gagged. I pulled back, blinking against the burn in my eyes. The fog remained, stubborn, blurred. Only when the front door opened, Samuel's voice calling, "Marissa?" Did it vanish, instant, like it had never been. I didn't tell him, you have to understand. Samuel was a man of reason. A high school history teacher who lived by rubrics, lesson plans, and logic. He folded his shirts into perfect squares, color-coded his binders, timed his morning routines to the minute. To him, everything had a cause, and every cause could be solved. If I told him a window fogged only when I was alone and reeked of iron, he'd type symptoms into a browser and give me humidity levels. But humidity doesn't breathe back. The fog returned 3 nights later. This time I stood longer, daring it, watching my own reflection smear and warp. My eyes looked too wide, my mouth parted in some expression I didn't recall making. I dragged my palm across the glass. Water clung to my hand, but the distortion lingered behind as though the glass itself resisted clarity. When Samuel entered carrying stacks of essays, the fog dissolved in a blink. He didn't notice. He rarely did, but I noticed, and I kept going back. Each evening after Samuel fell asleep in his chair or stayed late at school, I'd drift toward the window like a moth. It never disappointed. The warmth, the smell, the blur, a ritual, a secret I pressed against, and then came the first glimpse. It was a rainy Friday. The kettle clicked off, steam rising. I leaned close, watching the fog thicken, and then it happened. A small oval patch bloomed across the glass, fogging from the inside out. A breath that wasn't mine, my chest went still. The kitchen behind me was silent. And then I saw it in the reflection, a hand resting over mine, pale, too pale, veins like shadows under skin, fingers long and deliberate. It wasn't real, not on my skin, but I swear I felt the weight of it. Pressing cool and steady, I yanked back. The fog collapsed, leaving only myself staring back, wide-eyed and trembling. When Samuel came home minutes later, his key scraping the lock, I was still clutching my wrist. Samuel noticed the changes in me before he noticed the windows. "You're distracted," he said one morning, adjusting his tie. "Not sleeping well?" "I'm fine." "You've lost weight." "I'm fine," I repeated. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his steady teacher's gaze fixed on me. "If something's wrong, Marissa, talk to me." But what could I say? That the windows breathed? That I wasn't sure my reflection belonged to me anymore? Samuel would analyze it until it starved of mystery. That evening, he brought home a dehumidifier. "Got it cheap," he said, plugging it in near the kitchen. "Might help with the fog." My stomach clenched. "What fog?" "You mentioned it," he said simply. I didn't. He shrugged, satisfied with his logic, and the machine hummed into life. By morning, the air was dry, sharp against my throat. But the moment Samuel left for school, the window bloomed heavier than ever. The fog poured thick enough that I coughed, metallic in my lungs. The dehumidifier rattled angrily, its filter turning dark, and still the glass sweated. That night, Samuel cursed over the broken machine. "Defective," he muttered. Logical words. Always logical, but the logic didn't belong here. Mrs. Avery was the first to see him. She lived 2 doors down, a widow who tended her roses like children. She liked Samuel. He could recite history facts for hours, but her eyes lingered on me with something sharper. One morning, she intercepted me at the mailbox, her voice trembling. "Marissa, who was in your bedroom window last night?" My stomach dropped. "Excuse me?" "I saw 2 figures," she said. "One was you, I think." But the other, her gloved hands twisted. It was pressed against the glass, flat like a sticker, like it wasn't moving the way a body should. I forced a laugh. "You must have been tired." Her eyes widened. "I know what I saw." For days after, I avoided her. Then suddenly her curtain stayed shut. Her roses withered. Samuel said she'd fallen, broken her wrist. But when I caught sight of her once, weeks later, she looked hollow, as if something had pressed the life out of her. Soon after, her house went dark. She'd moved without a word. And I knew, in the marrow of me, the house had touched her too. By October, Samuel grew frantic. He kept notebooks, each page filled with symptoms and plans. Replace glass. Seal edges, therapy. He called contractors, replaced panes, caulked the frames, scheduled counseling appointments. Every attempt failed. New glass fogged instantly when I entered the kitchen. The caulk peeled away overnight. The dehumidifier's new filter clogged in hours, and with every logical fix Samuel tried, the house grew louder, fogging faster, smelling stronger, pressing closer. One evening he crouched before the kitchen window, fogging the glass with his own breath, desperate to mimic what I'd seen. His condensation vanished in seconds, harmless. He cursed, slamming his fist against the sill. When he turned toward me, his eyes were wild. "Why only you?" he demanded. "Why does it happen only when you're here?" I had no answer. Only the terrible truth. The window wasn't haunting me with what I didn't want. It was feeding me what I craved. Attention, presence, the intensity Samuel could never give. And I leaned closer each night, searching for him. By November, the house itself warped. The floorboards moaned hollow beneath my steps, as if vast empty chambers yawned beneath. Other nights, the walls seemed to press inward, squeezing the air tight as a coffin. I'd turn corners and find new panes, hallway windows that shouldn't exist, reflecting not the corridor but the kitchen, the bedroom, places I hadn't yet entered. Once, I saw myself already standing there, waiting. My reflection's lips moved in words I couldn't hear. Samuel changed too. His skin cooled, clammy against mine. His movements lagged a half-second behind, like a reflection struggling to keep pace. Worst of all, his reflection itself began to falter. I saw it first in the bathroom. He brushed his teeth behind me, but the mirror showed only me. Foam flecked his lips, the scrape of bristles loud, but no image formed beside mine. When I gasped, he frowned. What? I couldn't answer. Because in the corner of the mirror, the faceless man leaned closer. From then on, Samuel unraveled. He forgot papers at school, lost track mid-conversation. His colleagues called me with concern. Darren, his closest friend, whispered, "He looks drained." "Like something's hollowing him out," I lied. I said he was stressed. But I knew Samuel wasn't being drained. He was being replaced. The storm broke in December. Wind rattled the siding, lightning strobed across the Hudson. Samuel stumbled in, drenched, his hands shaking. "We have to leave," he said. His voice cracked. "Tonight? We can't stay here, Marissa. Something's wrong with the house, with you. He stopped. Because behind him in the window I saw us. A perfect replica of our kitchen. The faceless man sat at the table, sipping from Samuel's mug, his pale hand resting over mine. My duplicate leaned close, whispering words I couldn't hear but already knew. Yes, I'll stay." Samuel spun, saw nothing. He grabbed my shoulders. "Please don't look at it." But I couldn't look away. That night, the house sealed itself. Every door burned cold beneath our hands. Samuel battered them until his skin split. I stood still, transfixed as the fog poured across the living room window. Thick enough to crawl, words appeared, glowing faintly in the condensation. "You should not watch." But I did. Samuel sobbed, forehead pressed against the glass. His reflection stayed behind, whispering silently as his body slid down the frame. And then the faceless man stepped free. He peeled out of the glass like liquid metal, body rippling, features never settling. His presence overwhelmed the room. Anise sharp, soil rich, iron sharp as blood on the tongue. He extended his hand. Samuel croaked, "Don't." His voice weak, fading, already half gone. I bolted. The hallway stretched into glass. Every wall a pane. Every pane a reflection of myself, leaning closer to him, his hand on my wrist, my mouth forming words of surrender. Infinite Marissas, infinite betrayals, each one ahead of me. I slammed my fist into one pane. It shattered, slicing me open, but before the shards fell, it healed, seamless, reflecting me back with a smile I hadn't made. My blood streaked faint across the surface. He was waiting when I turned. His pale hand outstretched. His head tilted, steel shifting where a face should be, and this time I took it. The moment his fingers closed around mine, everything aligned. The smell of anise sweetened. The soil grounded me, the iron steadied in my veins. The restlessness that had gnawed me hollow for years dissolved. I was filled. I was wanted. The windows hummed, every pane vibrating until I could no longer tell where the glass ended and I began. His skin rippled like water as I stepped into him, into the waiting dark. I don't know where I am now. Motel rooms, bus stations, empty classrooms. Every window holds him. Every reflection shows me where I belong. I no longer dream of leaving, only of returning. And when I close my eyes, it isn't Samuel's breath I hear. It's his, the faceless man's. The alignment of the self has been successfully and permanently revised. I was 32 when the house began to change. It wasn't the bricks or the sagging floors, but the air. Something hostile threaded through the familiar scent of dust and ivy. The townhouse on Pine Street had always been a place of rituals. The radiator groaning awake at dawn, Michael's footsteps on the stairs, the faint scent of his soap lingering in our sheets. But in the months before it began, those scents shifted. A cologne I didn't recognize seeped into his shirts. A trace of lipstick not mine bled against his collar. I told myself it was stress, overwork, the kind of exhaustion that made people careless. But I knew, and the house knew too. The betrayal didn't arrive with a confession, but with symptoms. The first, silence that pressed on my chest at night until I woke choking. Then the photograph from our wedding fell at 3:17 a.m., shattering against the hearth. I picked it up with bleeding fingers, staring at our frozen smiles. Michael's eyes in that photo seemed already elsewhere. Then the whispers started. At first I thought it was the heating vents, but the sound was too dry, like sand shifting inside the walls. Sometimes it was faint, sometimes so close I could feel the syllables vibrate in my molars. Always it carried my name. One evening I found his phone beneath the pillow. I shouldn't have looked, but my body moved before my mind caught up. Messages filled the screen, words written in a script I didn't know. The characters bled across the glass like wet ink. When I touched the screen, frost bloomed under my fingertip as though the phone had been pulled from snow. I scrolled and scrolled. The words repeated, a phrase my eyes could not translate, but my body understood. She is yours too. When Michael came down for dinner that night, I asked him if he was seeing someone. My voice cracked but steadied itself. He looked at me, stone-eyed, and said, "No." The pause that followed was worse than the lie. He smiled, not kindly, but with a curl that felt like triumph. His eyes were the flat, glazed gray of stoneware, blinking too slow, as if something inside him had forgotten how human rhythm worked. Neighbors noticed things too. Mrs. Collins, the widow next door, told me she'd seen Michael standing in our upstairs window night after night. "But dear," she whispered, her throat shaking, "he was with you on the porch at the same time." The house itself grew more aggressive after that. The door stuck, not just with rust, but with intent. Windows refused to open even when I beat at them until my palms were raw. The ivy outside swelled across the brick like muscle, tightening its grip. The night I tried to leave, I waited until Michael's breathing turned shallow in sleep. I packed a bag, slid cash into my coat, and crept down the stairs. When I turned the lock, the wood pulsed beneath my palm. The door refused me. Michael's steps echoed from above, too slow, too heavy. Each one hummed through the beams as though the house itself carried him down. I ran to the basement, air turning thick, metallic in my throat. My diaphragm compressed as if invisible hands pushed against it, forcing me to my knees on the cold concrete. My pulse was a frantic, muffled drum against my ribs. Michael appeared at the top of the stairs. His mouth moved, but the sound was wrong. A distorted chord, his cadence stretched over a resonant hum that pressed against my eardrums until they rang. "Where are you going, Marissa?" Shadows bled from the corners. My wrist iced over, yanked backward by something unseen. His grin widened, teeth too sharp in the light. I screamed, and the bulb above burst, showering glass. The next thing I knew, I was outside, sprawled on wet asphalt. Neighbors huddled in their doorways. Behind me, Michael stood in the doorway, smiling as though nothing had happened. I never went back. I found a borrowed apartment blocks away, curtains drawn tight. But the smell of his cologne clung to me, faint but inescapable. And at night the tapping began. It wasn't random. 4 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, 4 again, Marissa. Each night it came, and each night I lay awake, throat tight, pretending not to listen. At first I thought I could outlast it. The tapping, the whispers, the dreams. Days blurred into nights. Coffee carried me through classes where my students' faces swam before me like shifting masks. I stopped answering calls, but Jenna persisted. One evening, her voice broke through my voicemail. "Marissa, please. You need help. You're not safe." When I finally picked up, relief should have followed. Instead, her voice warped mid-sentence. Soft at first, then too soft, sliding into the whisper from my vents. "Marissa." My name dragged slow and intimate, sand dry. My throat closed. I slammed the phone down. That was the last time I spoke to anyone. Isolation wasn't forced on me, it was chosen. Nights lengthened. Sometimes the tapping ceased and the absence was worse. Silence stretched until my pulse drowned it out. I would lie there almost begging for the rhythm again, because without it the air felt charged, like waiting for lightning. One night, exhaustion dragged me under. I dreamed of the townhouse. Ivy grew across the walls like veins. Michael sat at the dining table back to me, shoulders twitching like a puppet's. When he turned, his face was blurred, features sliding over one another in constant motion. His mouth opened and black script poured out like liquid, filling the floor, climbing my legs. I woke with my wrist burning as if bound by frost. By November, I couldn't bear the waiting. Fear bent into compulsion. I drove back to Pine Street. The townhouse waited, silent. The ivy pulsed thicker around its bricks. Inside, dust coated the air, metallic and damp. My lungs stung with every breath. The whisper started as soon as I crossed the threshold, crawling down the stairwell like insects. Upstairs, the bedroom hummed with something unseen. His phone still lay on the nightstand, glowing faintly, though it wasn't charged. I picked it up. The screen lit, words blooming and dripping. This time they seared through me. I felt them in my jaw, my fingertips, in the marrow of my bones. Frost climbed the glass under my hand. The phrase repeated, not in English but carved into me. "She is yours too." The floor shifted behind me. Michael entered slow. His smile split his face, stretched too far. "You shouldn't have left," he said, voice bending into that distorted chord, vibration sinking into my chest. "You were always hers." The walls contracted, the ceiling sagged, shadows thickened until the room pulsed like a living lung. My diaphragm collapsed and I slid down the wall, breath stolen. "I was faithful," I whispered, though the words felt childish, empty. He crouched, face inches from mine, eyes hollowed out. "That's why she chose you." The window rippled like water. My reflection stared back, except it wasn't me. Its mouth moved, lips shaping the words in tandem with Michael's. "She is yours too." The tapping thundered through the walls, floor, ceiling, until it was inside me. My ribs ached as though struck from within. I realized it had never been him tapping. It was the house spelling my name. The entity hadn't seduced Michael. It had waited for me. I stumbled backward, heart convulsing, bile rising. Mrs. Collins's scream carried faint from the street below. Michael's grin widened until it split the skin at his cheeks. The shadows wrapped my wrists, frost biting deep. I don't remember how I made it outside. Just the cold air, neighbors' faces pale with pity and horror. Michael in the doorway, smiling not at me but through me. Now I sit in the borrowed apartment, the curtains nailed down. The tapping has returned, but it isn't at the window anymore. It's inside the walls, inside me. And when I close my eyes, I hear it clearly for the first time. The invitation wasn't his, it was mine. I was invited because I was empty enough to open the door. I never imagined betrayal could rot the walls of a house, but the night I caught Michael whispering into his phone, laughing low in the kitchen while I lay awake upstairs, something shifted in the bones of our home. I'm Rachel Keene, 34, and I've lived most of my life quietly, carefully. Growing up, my parents' fights taught me to avoid noise. A slammed door meant a bruise waiting to happen. A raised voice meant hiding until silence returned. I grew into a woman who clung to stability. My job as a medical billing specialist at WakeMed, the small routines that made life predictable. Michael didn't fit into that picture. He was steady enough on paper, an insurance adjuster, tidy with his bills and grocery lists. But there was a heat beneath his composure, a sharp attention that burned when turned on me. I met him 2 years ago at a friend's barbecue. He was married to Anna. I promised myself I wouldn't step into that shadow. Then he looked at me, really looked, and I was undone. It started small. Dinner, drinks, then hotel rooms. Then the lies we told ourselves. It just happened. We're not bad people. We're meant to be together. He promised he'd leave her. I pretended to believe him, but now, years later, here I was, still waiting. That night from the stairs, I watched his back as he leaned on the counter. His posture was looser than I'd seen in months. "Yeah," he whispered, voice warm and intimate. "I miss you too." The words punched harder than I expected. I stayed frozen long after he hung up. Upstairs, his sleep came easy. Mine didn't. The next morning, his phone lay on the counter as I poured coffee. A notification glowed across the screen. No name, no number. Just jagged insect-like symbols bent at wrong angles. They looked alive. For a moment, I thought they twitched. "Morning," Michael said behind me. He kissed my temple and snatched up the phone. His thumb swiped it dark. "Morning," I echoed, my voice stiff. We ate in silence, the air heavy with unease. At work, I couldn't concentrate. Fluorescent lights hummed too loud, every keystroke echoed. During lunch, I searched alphabets online. Cyrillic, Greek, Arabic, none matched. What I had seen didn't belong to any language I knew. It looked like letters that had forgotten they weren't legs. Driving home, the house looked wrong. The shutters leaned inward as if listening. Inside, I smelled perfume, Anna's perfume, sweet and floral. But she wasn't there. The scent lingered anyway. That night, I confronted him. "Who were you talking to?" Michael froze mid-motion, shirt half unbuttoned. "What do you mean?" "On the phone. Last night. I heard you." His eyes flickered before he smoothed them blank. "It was nothing. A friend from work." "A friend? At midnight?" "You're being paranoid." He folded his shirt with deliberate care. "Don't do this, Rachel." But the crack had already formed. The next evening, his sister Megan visited. We were sitting in the living room when she stiffened. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "Hear what?" "Breathing." She nodded toward the vent. I listened. Soft, shallow, like someone hiding behind the grate. Michael entered the room. The sound vanished. Megan's face went pale. "You should get your ducks checked," she muttered. But her eyes told me she hadn't imagined it. Later that night, I slipped into the study while Michael showered. His phone glowed on the desk. Another message, the same crawling script. I touched the screen. My fingertips turned ice cold as though pressed to snow-packed glass. The symbols shimmered, curling almost into English, almost into meaning. "Rachel?" I jumped, shoving the phone aside. "Looking for a pen?" He smiled faintly. "Come to bed." At 2 a.m., the walls breathed. I pressed my ear against plaster and heard whispers, dry, clicking, insect-like. Beside me, Michael mumbled in his sleep. Not English. The same impossible tongue, days blurred. Michael denied everything. "You're stressed," he said. But then came our neighbor, Mr. Calloway. "Late night for your husband," he remarked as I carried groceries. "What do you mean?" "Saw him in the upstairs window around 2. Looked taller than him, though. Thinner, teeth too." He chuckled without humor. "Spooked me." I forced a smile. My hands shook so badly I dropped the milk. One night I followed Michael. He claimed to be working late, but his car led me down Old Mill Road, past the highway into dense woods. GPS showed nothing, just green emptiness. He parked at a dirt clearing, sat still, didn't move. The trees leaned inward, branches hooked like listening ears. The air smelled burnt. I couldn't leave the car. After 20 minutes, he drove back like nothing had happened. When he came home, he kissed my forehead. His lips were cold as stone. The last night I lived in that house, I woke to him standing at the foot of the bed. He wasn't touching the floor. His eyes were black, polished like stone, reflecting no light. He whispered in that dry insect tongue. The walls pulsed like flesh. The ceiling split, plaster peeling back like skin, and something long and jointed crawled through. I don't remember deciding to run. Only the taste of blood in my mouth, my heartbeat hammering until thought dissolved. Now I rent a small room with bare walls. A sagging mattress, one lamp. No windows, I don't sleep. I don't answer calls. But when I close my eyes, I still hear Michael's voice in that insect language. He isn't gone. He's waiting. And when I finally give in to sleep, he'll finish what he started. The room was supposed to be sanctuary. 4 walls, blank as paper. I thought emptiness would heal me. But absence doesn't silence, it amplifies. At night, the thin window panes vibrate with whispers. Dry clicks, deliberate pauses. Conversations I can't join but can't ignore. When I cover my ears, the sound blooms behind my eyes. I leave the lamp on. Shadows twitch. Once, half asleep, I saw a tall shape lean over me, its head tilted, its mouth stretching too wide. When I sat up, the room was empty. My job unraveled next. I entered wrong numbers, misfiled claims, forgot deadlines. Jennifer touched my arm. "Rachel, are you okay? You look like you haven't slept in a week." "I haven't," I whispered before realizing how it sounded. She frowned. "Take a sick day, but what would I do alone with the whispers?" I stayed until lunch, then stood at the copier. The whir of gears spoke in that alien tongue. Paper slid out hot, reeking faintly of smoke. The letters shimmered into jagged script before flattening back to English. I crumpled it and walked out. That night, Anna called. Seeing her name was like a punch. I shouldn't answer. But I did, "Rachel." Her voice was frayed. "We need to talk." I stayed silent. "I know about you and Michael, but this isn't what you think." "You think I don't know he's been lying?" "No, not lying. Not anymore. It's not him." Static bled through. Under it, another voice, low, metallic, scraping. Not hers. I hung up. Tried to block her number. My phone froze, screen filling with writhing symbols until it went black. I stopped going to work. Couldn't leave the room without feeling eyes on me. The bathroom mirror warped my reflection. Pupils too large, smile too sharp. Food lost taste. Water was metallic like blood on bitten lips. I began writing, hoping to anchor myself. But paragraphs shifted when I looked away. Sometimes whole pages filled with the script. Once, across 3 sheets, a name formed, Anna, not in English. But I understood. Megan knocked on my door 3 days later. I hadn't answered her calls, but she was persistent. When I opened it, she recoiled. "Rachel, you look sick." "I'm fine," I lied. "No, you're not." She tried to step past me. I grabbed her wrist harder than I meant to. "You can't come in." Her eyes widened. "What's happening to you?" "There's something in him," I whispered. "Something in Michael. It's not just cheating. It's worse." Her expression froze, then shifted into something I hadn't expected. Fear that wasn't for me. She leaned close, voice low. "Do you hear them too?" "In the vents?" My stomach dropped. She already knew. Before I could answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced down, gasped. The screen glowed with jagged script. She shoved it in her pocket. "I have to go." She left without looking back. Time dissolved. I marked days only by the weakening of my body. Sometimes I thought I saw Michael outside, standing in the parking lot, staring up at my window, his head cocked. When I blinked, he was gone. Other nights, I woke to find him at the foot of the bed, eyes black, not touching the floor, whispering. The walls rippled like skin. I buried my face in the pillow, but the words crawled inside me, filling the spaces my thoughts used to occupy. I tried to run. I packed a bag, gripped my car keys so tightly they left dents in my palm. I drove until my hands cramped, until highway signs blurred. But no matter which route I chose, the names twisted into script. Exit numbers scrambled. Letters unspooled into hooks and barbs. The car died on Old Mill Road, the same place I'd once followed him. Smoke curled from the hood. The trees leaned inward, branches like hands. The air smelled scorched. I stumbled into the woods. The deeper I went, the darker it grew. Branches arched like ribs. Shadows pulsed. My lungs ached, my legs burned, but something pulled me forward. The ground opened. A pit, black and endless. From it rose the sound of countless mandibles clattering in unison, and then his voice. Michael's voice. "I miss you too." The ground gave way beneath me. I fell. I woke in my rented room, soaked in sweat. The bag sat in the corner, unpacked. My car keys were on the nightstand. Had I dreamed it? No. My shoes were caked with dirt. I don't leave the bed now. I don't eat, don't drink. I write, though the words aren't mine. Page after page fills with the writhing script. Sometimes the lines shift into meaning I can almost grasp. She isn't gone. She's waiting. Anna. Always Anna. I think of her perfume in the house, the way it lingered when she wasn't there, the way her voice broke on the phone. Maybe she knew long before I did. Maybe she was never just Michael's wife. Maybe she was the door. Last night, the ceiling split again. Not a crack, a wound. The plaster peeled back like skin. Something long, jointed, grinning crawled through. Michael stood beneath it, his eyes pits of polished stone, his mouth whispering in that dry, insect tongue. "Rachel," he said, and this time I understood. The words meant, "Come home." I'm writing this by the flicker of the lamp. The bulb stutters. Shadows twitch at the corners of the room. I know when the light dies I won't be alone. I thought betrayal was the sharpest pain. That to be cheated on was to be cut open. I was wrong. Betrayal is only the door. What waits beyond it is worse. And when my eyes finally close, when sleep takes me for the last time, she'll finish what she started. I used to think Lisa and I were stronger than most, but looking back now, I realize the cracks were there all along. I just refused to see them. I was 34 when this all began, living in Bristol, England, in a tidy little semi-detached house that always smelled faintly of rain and printer ink. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer. My world was small, my desk, my sketches, the occasional client meeting. I liked it that way. My life was about focus and routine. Lisa was the opposite. She was 31, a marketing executive who thrived on the chaos of deadlines, presentations, and after-work drinks. She was all color and noise, while I was black and white. When we first met, I admired that about her. The way she could light up a room, make friends instantly, draw attention without even trying. She used to joke, "You're the anchor, David, and I'm the sail." It sounded romantic back then, but sails can pull you far from shore. In the early years, our differences balanced each other. She dragged me to parties. I grounded her on quiet Sunday mornings. But by 2017, things were shifting. Her late nights at the office multiplied. Her phone was always face down on the table, notifications silenced. She laughed too hard at texts she wouldn't show me. I told myself I was imagining things. My last relationship before Lisa had ended badly. Cheating, lies, and I promised myself I wouldn't let paranoia poison this marriage. But suspicion has a way of whispering to you in the dark, even when you beg it to shut up. The first time I heard the footsteps, I thought it was my imagination. It was a Thursday evening, rain tapping against the windows. I was at my desk upstairs when I heard it. Slow, steady steps in the hallway outside our bedroom. I froze. Lisa wasn't home yet. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. No answer. The steps stopped right outside the door. I opened it, heart pounding. Empty. Just shadows and silence. I told myself it was the old floorboards shifting with the weather. Houses make noises, right? But when it happened again and again, always just before Lisa came home late, I started to wonder if those cracks in the glass weren't just in my imagination. The thing about working from home is you spend too much time in your own head. You notice things others might miss. The way someone's laughter doesn't quite reach their eyes, or how their phone buzzes twice before they excuse themselves to take a call. Lisa's excuses were stacking up. One night she didn't get home until 2 in the morning. When I asked where she'd been, she tossed her coat on the sofa and sighed like I was a child asking too many questions. "Client dinner," she said. "We had a big pitch coming up. You want me to fail at my job because you're insecure?" Her tone stung, but what hurt worse was the way she laughed afterward. A cold, dismissive laugh. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But the footsteps, the late nights, the secrecy, they didn't add up. One afternoon, she left her laptop on the dining table. She was in the shower, humming to herself. I told myself I wasn't going to snoop, but curiosity isn't a choice when your stomach is twisted in knots every day. I lifted the lid. Emails. Hotel bookings under her name. Not fancy business hotels, but small boutique places in Bristol. Friday nights. Always one night. Always 2 guests. When she came downstairs, towel wrapped around her hair, I confronted her. My voice shook as I read the names of the hotels out loud. "Who are you meeting at the Royal Inn every Friday?" Her reaction wasn't fear, wasn't guilt. It was amusement. She smirked. "You've really lost it, haven't you?" she said. "God, you're pathetic." Then she laughed. Laughed in my face like I was a joke. I stood there, humiliated, my hands trembling. That laugh cut deeper than the betrayal itself. Because in that moment, I realized she didn't even respect me enough to lie properly. The first time I saw him, I thought it was coincidence. A man leaning against a black car across the street from our house. Dark jacket, shaved head, broad shoulders. He didn't look like a neighbor. He didn't move for hours, just smoked cigarettes and watched. The next day I saw him again, outside the cafe where I sometimes worked, sitting 2 tables away, pretending to read a newspaper but never turning the page. By the third time, I knew it wasn't chance. Midnight. I was upstairs sketching when I glanced out the window. There he was again, standing across the street under a lamppost, face half hidden, watching the house. I told Lisa, "There's a man following us. I've seen him 3 times now." She rolled her eyes. "Not everything revolves around your imagination, David." But there was something in her expression I couldn't place. Not annoyance, not fear, something closer to satisfaction. She was hiding a smile. That night, the footsteps came again. Louder this time, not slow and cautious, but deliberate, heavy. And for the first time, they didn't stop outside the door. They rushed forward. I didn't even have time to stand before he was in the room. The man from the car, the man from the cafe. Muscular, eyes like stone, a knife glinting in his hand. And behind him, Lisa, not screaming, not shocked, calm. My blood froze. "Lisa, who is he?" She looked at me with a coldness I had never seen before. "Someone who actually makes me feel alive." The man lunged. Instinct took over. I grabbed the nearest thing, a lamp, and swung. It shattered against his arm. He barely flinched. He drove me back against the wall, knife grazing my side. Pain exploded through me. "Stop," Lisa screamed, but not at him, at me. "Don't hurt him." We fought, crashing into furniture, blood smearing across the carpet. I heard my own voice shouting, raw and desperate, as I struggled against his weight. Somehow I kicked him off long enough to grab the phone and dial 9999. The sirens came minutes later, but to me, it felt like a lifetime. By the time the police burst in, I was on the floor bleeding, the stranger pinned against the wall by 2 officers. Lisa was screaming, but not for me. For him. The aftermath was a blur of stitches, bandages, and questions. The police told me the man had a record: assaults, theft, stalking, dangerous, unstable. And Lisa? She claimed she didn't know. But I'd seen the look in her eyes that night. She knew exactly who he was. She left the next morning. No apology, no goodbye. Just packed her things into 2 suitcases and walked out with him. I stayed. The house felt like a tomb, the air heavy with silence. But some nights when I worked late, I still heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, stopping right outside my door. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was trauma. Or maybe some cracks in the glass never really heal. Trust is the foundation of every relationship. But once broken, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. Ignoring red flags, silencing your instincts, or clinging to denial only deepens the cracks until everything shatters. Love cannot survive without honesty, respect, and safety. And sometimes the bravest choice is not holding on, but walking away before the footsteps reach your door. Seattle has a way of swallowing people whole. The rain doesn't fall. It lingers, clinging to your clothes, your skin, your thoughts. Our apartment overlooked the river, glass windows catching the reflections of ferries cutting through the sound. From the outside, Sophie and I looked like a couple in a magazine spread. Me, a software developer who thrived on routine. Her, a gallery consultant with perfect hair and an enviable smile. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of what I thought was stability. But cracks in glass don't always start loud. Sometimes they whisper. The first crack came when Sophie's phone never left her hand. She kept it face down, silenced, her thumbs moving quickly when she thought I wasn't looking. Then came the late nights, gallery events, art inspections, dinners with clients. At first, I didn't question it. She had a career that thrived on appearances. But slowly, Her explanations grew thinner, her absences longer. One evening I asked, "Sophie, are you okay? You've been so distant lately." She laughed lightly, brushing her hair back. "I'm fine. You're imagining things. Just tired, that's all." I wanted to believe her. God, I did. I told myself I was paranoid, that her ambitions were pulling her in directions I couldn't always follow. But then I started noticing details I couldn't ignore. Receipts from places she never mentioned. Perfume lingering in the air even when she claimed she'd gone straight from work to bed. A red scarf folded neatly on the couch, one I'd never seen before. One night, I woke at 2 a.m. to the faint hum of her voice on the balcony. She whispered into the phone, her tone low and warm, a softness she hadn't used with me in months. I listened, frozen in bed, my chest tightening. When she came back in, I pretended to sleep. I kept my breathing steady, but inside, something fractured. I wanted proof. I wanted certainty. Because the thing about betrayal is, it doesn't just hurt. It makes you question whether you've been blind your entire life. The night I followed her was the first time I realized the rain wasn't just weather, it was cover. She said she had a work dinner. She wore a black dress I'd never seen before, her lips red, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. "Don't wait up," she said, almost as an afterthought. I waited until she left, then slipped on my coat. The streets glistened under the sodium lamps as I followed from a distance. She walked quickly, heels tapping against the wet pavement until she reached a sleek black sedan parked near the corner. The driver stepped out, tall, older, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that radiated danger. He opened the door for her, and she laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in months. She touched his arm as she slid inside. My stomach clenched. I trailed them to a restaurant downtown, a place I couldn't afford on my salary. Through the window, I watched them sit close, their hands brushing across the table. She leaned in as he whispered something that made her laugh again, softer this time. "Private." That was the moment the truth settled in my chest like a weight. Sophie wasn't mine anymore. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I went home, drenched, shaking, my thoughts spiraling. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own marriage. Patterns emerged. The sedan always waiting near gallery events. Texts deleted before I could glance. The faint smell of cologne on her clothes when she came home late. But then things turned darker. Packages began arriving at our door. Expensive items, jewelry, designer scarves, even a watch, none of which I'd bought. When I asked Sophie, she shrugged. Clients send gifts, perks of the job, yet some packages had no sender, no notes, just quiet reminders that someone else was marking their territory. And then I saw him again. The same man, Damien, leaning against his car across the street from my office building. He didn't move when I saw him. He just watched, calm and certain, as if daring me to acknowledge him. That night, Sophie curled against me in bed, distant but present enough to keep the illusion. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how long she'd been slipping away, and how far she was willing to go. Once you notice a lie, you start pulling the thread, and soon, everything unravels. I started checking her phone when she left it unattended, though it was rare. Most of the time, it was locked, shielded. But once, while she was in the shower, I caught a glimpse. Messages cleared except for one. "Don't let him get suspicious, he's harmless." Harmless. The word echoed like a taunt. At work, Lena, my colleague, noticed my distraction. "You've been off lately," she said. "You okay?" I almost told her everything, but how do you explain that the person you built your life with has made you a ghost in your own home? I just smiled weakly. Just tired. Nights grew heavier. Sophie's words cut sharper. "Ethan, you're so rigid you'll never understand what I need. Don't make me miserable in this marriage." It wasn't just an affair, it was psychological warfare. She painted me as dull, predictable, incapable of keeping up with her hunger for excitement. Every time I tried to reach her, she pushed me further away, making me feel invisible, smaller. And Damien? He was everywhere, passing by my office, standing at the grocery store across from our apartment. Once I came home to find him in the lobby, speaking casually with our neighbor Henry. He looked at me as if he owned the ground I walked on. I began to wonder, was this just about Sophie? Or was Damien pushing further, staking a claim in my life, not just my marriage? The nights grew colder. The rain outside the windows felt endless. And the silence between Sophie and me wasn't silence anymore. It was contempt disguised as calm. The night it all broke open was one of those storms that made the entire city flicker with power outages. The river outside churned under the wind, and our apartment was lit only by the dim glow of candles. I'd had enough. "Sophie," I said, standing in the middle of the living room. "I know about Damien. I've followed you. I've seen everything." She looked up from her glass of wine, unflinching. Her smile was small, almost amused. "You think knowing is enough? You can't stop what's already begun. You're too predictable." My fists clenched. "Why? Why him?" She tilted her head. "Because he sees me. He gives me what you can't. You live in your routines, Ethan. You're safe. But I don't want safe anymore." Before I could respond, a shadow moved at the edge of the candlelight. Damien stepped forward from the hallway, his presence filling the room. "Evening," he said smoothly, as though he lived there. My heart pounded. "Get out." He smirked, blocking the door. "Not until we settle this." The fight erupted fast. Chairs toppled, glass shattered. He was stronger, but desperation gave me an edge. I grabbed the nearest thing, Sophie's vase, and smashed it against the floor, shards scattering. He slipped, and in that moment I lunged, shoving him hard into the corner. I shouted for help, loud enough that Henry, our neighbor, rushed in. Damien cursed, staggering as Henry dialed the police. Sophie stood in the corner, arms crossed. Not a scream, not a tear, just silent amusement, as if watching a performance she had directed. When the police arrived, Damien was dragged out in handcuffs, charged with stalking and harassment. Sophie didn't defend him. She didn't defend me either. She just packed a bag the next morning and left, without a word. After Damien's arrest, silence filled the apartment. But it wasn't peace. It was aftermath. Sophie was gone. She left behind a few clothes, her books, and the faint smell of her perfume in the closet. No note, no apology, just absence. I tightened the locks, installed cameras. Every late-night knock made my heart jump. Every unfamiliar car idling outside sent a chill down my spine. Sometimes I'd swear I saw a black sedan across the street, headlights off, waiting. Henry checked in often. "You're stronger than you think," he said once. Maybe he was right, but I didn't feel strong. I felt emptied, gutted by betrayal that went deeper than infidelity. Months passed. I went back to work, tried to focus on code, on systems that made sense because people no longer did. I laughed occasionally with Lena, found small routines that made the days bearable, but at night, when the rain hit the windows, I remembered Sophie's words. "You'll never understand what I need." She was right. I never understood. Not her hunger, not her recklessness, not her cruelty. What I did understand, finally, was that love, real love, doesn't destroy. It doesn't leave you questioning your worth or fearing every shadow. Seattle rain never really stops. It lingers, soft and heavy, like the memory of betrayal. But it also washes. It teaches you that no matter how deep the cracks, the glass can be replaced. Slowly, carefully, with patience. I'm still rebuilding. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with screams or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes quietly, disguised as charm, validation, or excitement. But love that thrives on lies is not love at all, it's possession. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once broken, it takes more than apologies or passion to rebuild. Real love is steady, not manipulative. It gives strength instead of stripping it away. If you ever find yourself questioning your reality, your worth, or your safety because of someone else's actions, walk away. Because no marriage, no relationship, is worth losing yourself to. I used to think of my life as safe, maybe even predictable. A neat little package of morning routines, school drop-offs, and steady work hours. My name is Ryan Prescott, and for the longest time, I believed I had built something stable. A family, a home, a sense of order I never had as a kid. I grew up with betrayal baked into the walls of my childhood. My father had a knack for disappearing, always with another excuse, another lie. Sometimes it was business trips that didn't exist. Sometimes it was women who weren't my mother. The fallout was brutal, and trust became something I never gave away lightly. So when I married Vanessa, I thought I had beaten the odds. She was ambitious, magnetic, the kind of woman who could light up a room at a networking event or family barbecue. We had 2 kids together, Emily, 5, and Noah, 3. They were my anchor. When I tucked them into bed each night, I felt a peace I never thought possible. Our townhouse on Maplewood Drive looked like every suburban dream. A lawn I kept trimmed on Saturdays, bikes leaning against the garage, toys scattered across the backyard. It felt like safety. But looking back, maybe I mistook appearances for truth. Vanessa worked in marketing, which meant long hours and plenty of events. I didn't question it. I was busy too, working as an IT consultant. Our schedules overlapped enough that we needed help, so we hired Sophie, a college student from down the street. At 22, she was bright, eager, and our kids adored her. She was practically family. For years, I convinced myself things were fine, even when little details started nagging at me. Vanessa's phone buzzing late at night, nights when she came home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers, or when Sophie seemed oddly nervous around me, as if hiding something. I told myself it was nothing. Paranoia. Ghosts from my childhood. Then came that Friday evening in late August. I left work early, wanting to surprise Vanessa. The sky outside was heavy with storm clouds, thunder rolling in the distance as I pulled into the driveway. Inside, the house was too quiet. No cartoons, no laughter, no footsteps of kids running across hardwood. My chest tightened. I climbed the stairs and pushed open the bedroom door. And there they were. Vanessa, sitting cross-legged on the bed, glass of wine in hand. Sophie beside her, laughing nervously. And Nathan Cole, a man I'd never met before, lounging casually against the headboard like he owned the place. For a moment, no one spoke. My world tilted. "Ryan," Vanessa said, amusement flashing across her face. "You're home early. Didn't expect this." I stood frozen in the doorway. "What the hell is going on here?" She smirked. "Relax. We're just having a little fun. Don't worry, the kids are fine." But I wasn't reassured, because the house was silent, eerily silent, and when I rushed downstairs, there were no toys scattered, no sign Sophie had been watching Emily or Noah at all. That night was the first time I realized something much darker was happening in my home, and that the person I trusted most might be the one pulling the strings. After that night, nothing felt real. Vanessa brushed it off, acting like I'd walked in on a harmless hangout. "You're overreacting," she said, pouring another glass of wine. Sophie looked too frightened to speak, and Nathan left without a word. My gut screamed something was wrong, but Vanessa's calm demeanor made me question myself. The following weeks only deepened my unease. Strange social media posts began appearing, photos of Vanessa and Sophie at bars, captioned "Girls' Night Out." Even on nights Sophie was supposed to be babysitting. CPS showed up at our door one Tuesday afternoon after an anonymous report of child neglect. The inspector asked me pointed questions about my drinking habits, my temper, my ability to supervise the kids. I answered them all, but the seed of doubt had been planted. At work, colleagues hinted at rumors. "Everything okay at home, Ryan?" they'd ask, too casually. My own family started calling with concern, saying they'd heard I was struggling to keep up with the kids, that maybe I was overwhelmed. It didn't take long to realize the whispers had a source, and that source was inside my own house. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I confronted Vanessa. "The CPS report," I said, standing in the doorway of the kitchen. "That was you, wasn't it?" She didn't even look up from her phone. "Why would I do that? Maybe someone's jealous of us. You know how it is." "You're lying," I snapped. "I know you are." Finally, she raised her eyes, calm as ever. "Ryan, you're imagining things. You've been stressed for months, maybe you need help." Her words chilled me. It wasn't just denial, it was gaslighting. She wanted me to doubt myself, to believe the narrative she was feeding everyone else. That was the moment I realized I couldn't fight this alone. I needed proof. Hard proof. I hired a private investigator named Mark Delaney, ex-cop, mid-50s, gruff voice that made it clear he'd seen worse than my situation. I gave him everything: times, names, my suspicions. 2 weeks later, he came back with evidence that made my blood run cold. Vanessa and Nathan had been involved for months. Sophie wasn't just a bystander, she was part of their plan. Together they'd staged photos and videos, Sophie pretending to be overwhelmed while watching the kids, Vanessa setting up scenarios that made me look negligent. Nathan had even coached Sophie on how to act in front of cameras, creating a trail of evidence that painted me as unstable and unfit. "They're building a case," Mark told me over black coffee in a downtown diner. "If this goes to court, they'll say you're unfit to have custody. They'll say you're dangerous." I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles went white. "Why? Why would she do this?" Mark shrugged. "Power, control. Maybe she wants out of the marriage but doesn't want to lose the kids. Maybe it's just the thrill. Some people like to watch others burn." The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Vanessa wasn't content with ordinary. She needed excitement, chaos, and destroying me gave her both. Armed with Mark's recordings, photos, and testimony, I started planning my own move. But Vanessa wasn't slowing down. Anonymous calls escalated. Neighbors reported seeing me yelling at the kids, incidents that never happened. I started sleeping on the couch, checking the locks 3 times a night. Everywhere I turned, the ground felt less solid. I decided to set my own trap. At a family dinner one Sunday night, Vanessa playing the perfect mother, Sophie smiling stiffly at the table. I hit record on my phone, tucked neatly into my shirt pocket. When the kids ran upstairs to play, I leaned back and said, "I know everything, Vanessa. The babysitter, Nathan, the photos, the CPS calls. It's over." For a split second, her mask slipped. Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "Do you?" she said softly. "Or are you just imagining it again? Everyone already thinks you're unstable, Ryan. That's the beauty of it. You can scream the truth all you want, but no one will believe you." Sophie's fork clattered against her plate. Nathan, who had joined us uninvited, chuckled under his breath. I kept my voice steady. "I've recorded everything. The lies, the manipulation. It's over." The silence was heavy. Then Vanessa laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "You think winning means anything?" she said. "People already see you as the bad guy. I'll disappear, and you'll pay for doubting me." That night, she packed a bag. Sophie followed. Nathan was already waiting outside in his car. They left without looking back, leaving Emily and Noah sleeping upstairs as if they were pieces of luggage too heavy to carry. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet, and I was alone with the children, the only part of my life that still made sense. The private investigator's files saved me. When CPS came again, I handed them the recordings, the photos, the documentation Mark had compiled. Slowly, the tide began to turn, but the damage was deep. Neighbors still looked at me with suspicion. Friends were cautious, unsure what to believe. Even family took time to understand the full scope of Vanessa's manipulation. Emily and Noah were the ones who suffered most. They cried for their mother, asking when she'd be back. I didn't know how to answer. All I could do was hold them close and promise they were safe. Weeks passed. Therapy sessions helped, though some nights I still woke up in a cold sweat, expecting another anonymous call, another knock on the door. Vanessa sent cryptic messages from untraceable numbers. "You'll never really be free. Don't get too comfortable." But I kept moving forward. I couldn't let her shadow define me. My kids needed a father who could protect them, who wouldn't collapse under the weight of betrayal. It's strange how quickly trust can shatter, how someone you share a bed with can turn into your enemy without warning. I'm still learning how to live with that. But one thing is certain, I will never again confuse appearances for truth. They say every marriage looks perfect from the outside. People see the smiling photos, the curated vacations, the little dog wagging its tail in the yard, and they assume life behind closed doors is just as spotless. For years, Julia and I were that couple. We had the house in Northeast Portland, modest but stylish, with a garden she insisted we keep Instagram-worthy. We had Bailey, our golden retriever, who was probably the only truly happy soul under our roof. And we had the appearance of stability. 10 years together, a solid partnership, the kind of life our friends envied. But appearances are fragile. All it takes is a shift, a crack, one thing out of place. For us, that was my job. In 2018, I lost my position as an IT consultant after a round of layoffs. On paper, it shouldn't have been catastrophic. I had savings, freelance options, time to rebuild. But Julia looked at me differently after that. She didn't say it outright, but I could feel her respect slipping like water draining through a sieve. She started working longer hours. Her job in digital advertising had always been demanding, but suddenly, client dinners kept her out until midnight. She traveled more. She posted glossy selfies with captions like, "Late nights, endless possibilities." At first, I asked gently, "Are you seeing someone else?" She laughed in my face. "You're ridiculous. You're imagining things. Focus on your work." Her dismissal stung, but what hurt worse was how easily she said it. No hesitation, no fear, like she'd rehearsed it. I told myself I was paranoid. After all, I've always been meticulous, controlling even. I like routines, predictability. Maybe I was projecting my insecurity onto her. Maybe the problem was me. But then her phone started buzzing at odd hours. Quick texts she deleted before I could glance at the screen. Business trips that didn't line up with her company's calendar. And the way she smiled when she thought I wasn't looking. Smiled at something far away. Someone else entirely. That's when the crack became impossible to ignore. Suspicion is a dangerous thing. It eats at you slowly, like rust under paint, until all that's left is a corroded shell. I tried to suppress it, but every time Julia came home late, every time she silenced her phone, the rust spread. One rainy Thursday, I decided to stop wondering and start watching. I followed her. It wasn't hard. She wasn't exactly trying to hide, at least not from the world. She left in her silver SUV, saying she had a networking dinner downtown. I gave her 10 minutes, then grabbed my jacket and slipped into the car. Portland in winter is forgiving for a man trying not to be seen. Foggy streets, slick roads, headlights reflecting off wet pavement. I trailed her across the river, through quieter streets, past downtown lights, until she turned onto an industrial stretch on the outskirts of the city. Warehouses lined the road, most of them abandoned or half-shuttered. She parked beside one, killed her lights, and waited. I watched from down the block, heart pounding. Then he appeared, tall, confident. Dark jacket, the kind of swagger that comes from knowing you're dangerous. They embraced like old lovers, his hand slipping easily to the small of her back. She laughed. God, she laughed in a way I hadn't heard in years. They disappeared into the warehouse, leaving me in the car with my hands clenched so tight around the wheel my knuckles went white. I stayed until they returned an hour later, whispering, laughing, kissing in the shadows. My stomach churned. This wasn't just an affair. It was deliberate. She wasn't just cheating. She was living another life entirely. I drove home that night numb, 100 questions spinning in my head. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And worst of all, how much of our life together had been a lie? The next morning, Julia breezed into the kitchen, humming, pouring coffee as if nothing was wrong. I stared at her across the table, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the woman I'd watched in that warehouse. For the first time, I realized I didn't know who I was married to anymore. I told myself I needed proof, evidence, something undeniable. Confrontation without it would only end with her laughter, her gaslighting, her smile that said, "You're crazy, Mark." So I began collecting photos, videos. I followed them again, recording from a distance. I captured their embraces, their whispered exchanges. My hands shook as I replayed the footage, each frame driving the knife deeper into my chest. But then the tables turned. One night, as I pulled into our driveway, I noticed a black car idling across the street. Its headlights glared at me like eyes. Inside, a silhouette sat perfectly still, watching. The next night, the same car appeared outside the grocery store while I loaded bags into my trunk, and again outside my gym, though I hadn't seen Julia all day. Then the text arrived. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it. You know what she can do." My blood went cold. The number was anonymous, the tone unmistakable. Liam. That was the name I'd overheard Julia whisper in the warehouse. He wasn't just her lover. He was watching me. I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every knock at the door jolted me upright. I started checking the locks 3-4 times a night. Bailey barked at shadows, and I found myself barking back, nerves frayed to the point of breaking. Julia noticed. "You look terrible," she said one morning, smirking over her coffee. "You should get some rest." I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shout, "I know everything." But fear held me back. Not fear of losing her. I'd already lost her, but fear of what she and Liam were capable of together. I wasn't just fighting for my marriage anymore. I was fighting for my life. It happened on a Saturday night, the rain hammering against the windows, the city outside muffled in fog. I couldn't take it anymore. The evidence was enough. The fear was too heavy. I had to confront her. She was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone, Bailey curled at her feet. I stood in the doorway, my fists clenched. "It's over," I said. My voice surprised me, steady, calm. "I know about Liam. I followed you. I have everything on video." She looked up slowly, then smiled. A cold, calculated smile. "Do you really?" she said. "Or are you just imagining revenge?" Before I could answer, a shadow moved in the corner of the room. Liam. He stepped out from the dark hallway, broad shoulders filling the space, a grin on his face. "Evening, Mark," he said, voice low and smooth. My stomach dropped. He'd been here the whole time. I backed toward the door, but he was faster. He lunged, slamming me against the wall. Pain shot through my ribs. I fought back, shoving, swinging, anything to break free. Bailey barked wildly, but Julia just stood there, watching, smirking. The scuffle was messy, desperate. I managed to grab a lamp and smash it across Liam's arm, enough to stagger him. Blood trickled down my face, my vision blurred, but instinct pushed me forward. I bolted for the door, stumbling into the rain. Behind me, I heard Julia's voice, not panicked, not scared, but sharp and angry. "Don't let him go." That voice burned worse than any bruise. I spent the night at a friend's apartment, bandaging cuts, shaking with adrenaline. By morning, I went to the police. At first, they doubted me. Cheating spouses, domestic disputes, they've heard it all. But when I showed them the videos, the texts, the recordings, their expressions hardened. They took me seriously. Within weeks, Liam was arrested. Assault, stalking, a rap sheet longer than I'd imagined. But Julia, she slipped through their fingers. By the time the police came knocking, she was gone. Social media wiped clean, accounts deleted, no forwarding address. It was as if she'd never existed. I kept the house. Bailey needed stability, and so did I. But the walls felt hollow. Rain against the windows reminded me of fists against my ribs. Every knock at the door made me flinch. Even now, years later, I still glance over my shoulder when I walk through Portland's foggy streets, half expecting to see Julia or someone she sent. People ask why I don't start dating again, why I don't move on. They don't understand. When the person you trusted most uses love as a weapon, betrayal leaves scars deeper than any knife. I survived, but survival doesn't mean peace. Love built on lies is a cage, not a home. Ignoring red flags, silencing your instincts, or clinging to appearances only gives manipulators more power. True love demands honesty and respect. Without it, you're not a partner, but a prisoner. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, even if it means stepping into the storm alone. I never thought a house could feel like a stranger. When Megan and I first moved into 47 Willow Crescent, it felt like the kind of place people romanticize. High ceilings, a wide staircase with polished banisters, and a fireplace that seemed to promise cozy winters. A Victorian, old bones but charming, the kind of house you imagine filling with kids and laughter. 7 years later, it felt haunted, and not by ghosts. Megan and I had been married long enough to have collected habits more than memories. She was 35, a freelance interior designer who thrived on creativity, long hours, and the admiration of her clients. I was 38, a software engineer whose life ran on routine. Coffee at 7:30, code review at 9, takeout Thai on Fridays. Where she loved spontaneity, I found comfort in predictability. A year ago, Megan confessed she'd cheated while on a business trip in Seattle. His name was Leo Hawkins, 40, a marketing consultant. She swore it was brief, a fling that meant nothing. She wept at our kitchen table and told me she loved me, that she wanted us. I grew up in a house poisoned by lies. My father's cheating had torn my parents apart, and I promised myself I'd never repeat that story. So I forgave her, not because I trusted her, but because I wanted to believe forgiveness was stronger than suspicion. But shadows linger. It started small, calls at 12:30 a.m., silence at first, then heavy breathing, then my name, whispered low and unsettling. I thought it was some prank until I noticed the scratches on the back door, thin claw-like marks around the lock. Probably raccoons, Megan said, her laugh too casual. But raccoons don't whisper my name. I installed cameras. For a week, nothing. Then one night I saw Megan outside beneath the street lamp, speaking with a tall man in a black coat. I watched her hand him something metallic, a key. I confronted her the next morning, trying to mask my panic. "Where were you last night?" I asked. "At the studio," she said, pouring coffee like we weren't standing on a cliff's edge. "Your phone shows you across town." She smiled faintly. "Anthony, you're reading too much into this. You don't need to worry about me." Her calmness made me doubt my own eyes, but the seed was planted. I started noticing everything. Her vague explanations, the way she slipped her phone face down on the table, her new habit of leaving the house dressed better than usual. One morning during a run by the bay, I noticed someone trailing me. A man, always a block behind. When I slowed, he vanished. That night, muddy footprints appeared beneath our bedroom window. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I told myself I needed proof. Proof so undeniable it couldn't be brushed off with a smile. That was my mistake, because by then, Leo Hawkins was already back in Megan's life, and forgiveness had bought him a front row seat into mine. Suspicion is like a crack in a window. At first, it's small. You tell yourself it's nothing, but every day, with every gust of wind, it spreads. I started digging. I followed Megan once, discreetly, pretending to stay late at work but really trailing her cab across the city. It stopped at a high-rise overlooking the bay, Leo's penthouse. She didn't hesitate before walking inside. That night, she came home at 2 a.m., smelling faintly of whiskey. "Client emergency," she said again, slipping out of her heels. I just nodded, my chest a tight knot. At work, I started receiving anonymous envelopes. No return address. Inside, photographs. Me leaving the house, jogging by the water, sitting in traffic. Each note included a message scrawled in thick black ink. You don't deserve her. She was mine first. You can't protect her from me. I knew it was Leo. The man wasn't just having an affair with my wife, he wanted me to know. He wanted me afraid. One night I tried to confront Megan calmly. Are you still seeing him? I asked, my voice trembling despite my best effort. Her eyes didn't flinch. No, I told you that's over. Then why do I keep finding lies? She set her glass down hard enough to crack. Because you don't trust me, Anthony, you never have. Her ability to flip the blame left me speechless. I sat in silence while she stormed upstairs. Alone in the kitchen, I stared at the half-empty wine glass and realized I wasn't fighting for her anymore. I was fighting for a marriage she'd already abandoned. The phone calls grew more frequent. Always 12:30. Sometimes just breathing, sometimes whispers. She's not yours. You don't know what she wants. Sleep became impossible. I checked locks twice, 3 times. I dreamed of footsteps outside the door. My body lived in a state of permanent adrenaline, waiting for the moment Leo would stop taunting and finally act. And yet part of me still couldn't let go. Forgiveness had turned into obsession. If I left, it felt like admitting defeat. If I stayed, I might lose everything, including my life. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night. I returned home early from work and heard voices upstairs. Megan's voice, low and soothing. A man's voice, deeper, sharper. My chest locked as I climbed the stairs. Leo was standing in my bedroom. Broad shoulders, sharp suit, eyes that burned with the thrill of being caught. Megan stood between us, pale and trembling. Anthony, Leo said smoothly, like we were old friends. I was just visiting. In my house? My voice cracked. He smiled. Your house. Her house. It's all the same, isn't it? I lunged before I even realized what I was doing. My fist caught his jaw, but he barely staggered. He shoved me hard, sending me into the dresser. Megan screamed. You think you can keep her? Leo roared, his face twisted with rage. She was mine before you ever laid eyes on her. Megan grabbed his arm. Stop, Leo. But he threw her aside like she was nothing. I scrambled up, blood running down my temple. For a moment I thought he'd kill me. His hands curled into fists, his eyes wild. But then he stepped back, laughing. Not tonight. You're not worth the jail time. He left the house with Megan chasing after him. I collapsed onto the floor, my chest heaving, the room spinning around me. That was the night I realized forgiveness had become a weapon. She wasn't protecting me, she was protecting him. And I was just the fool standing in the middle of their twisted game. News spreads fast on Willow Crescent. Neighbors whispered when they saw the broken lamp through the window, the blood on my shirt, Megan storming out with Leo. She never came back. Not to pack, not to explain. Just gone. The following week I moved into a small apartment in the Mission District. 2 rooms, cracked walls, the faint smell of smoke from the taqueria downstairs. It wasn't home, but at least it was mine. The letters didn't stop, though. One arrived taped to my door, a photo of Megan laughing with another man at a bar. Scrawled beneath it, she'll never be yours. She was never anyone's. I realized then that Leo wasn't Megan's only danger. She chased thrill like oxygen, and men like him would always circle her. She'd abandoned me, but not the chaos she thrived on. I changed my number. I avoided the bay, avoided the house, avoided the past. But safety never came. I checked locks 3 times every night, slept with the light on, flinched at every phone buzz. Forgiveness hadn't freed me. It had chained me to a ghost. Months passed. I rebuilt, piece by piece. Therapy, long walks, work that numbed my brain. I told myself the worst was over. Then one night, another envelope slid under my apartment door. Inside, a single photograph. Megan, smiling, her arm wrapped around a stranger I didn't recognize. The handwriting at the bottom chilled me. Round 2. I sat in silence, the photo trembling in my hands. The shadows had followed me here. That's when I finally understood. Evil doesn't always knock down your door in the form of monsters. Sometimes it slips in quietly, wearing a smile, asking for forgiveness. And sometimes when you grant it, you invite it to stay forever. Forgiveness is powerful, but blind forgiveness can destroy you. Trust is not rebuilt by ignoring lies, but by confronting truth. When we choose to look away from red flags, we give dangerous people permission to control us. Love cannot survive without honesty, and forgiveness without boundaries becomes weakness. Protect your peace, even if it means letting go of the person you once believed you couldn't live without. I've always believed that truth is fragile, not truth itself, but the trust that surrounds it. My father taught me that the hard way. He was a man who told lies so casually that by the time my mother realized the depth of his deceptions, money gone, friends betrayed, it was too late to fix what was broken. He left us with nothing but debts and suspicion. So when I married Lily 10 years ago, I promised myself I would never allow lies to rot us from the inside. I wanted a marriage built on solid ground, not shifting sand. And for a while I believed I had it. We bought a brownstone at 214 Chestnut Street in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood. Cobblestone streets lined with gas lamps, mist curling around in the early mornings like something out of a painting. Lily loved the history of it, the way the old wood creaked under our footsteps. She said the place had character. I agreed. I worked as an investment analyst. Long hours, plenty of numbers, plenty of pressure. Lily worked as an art curator, always darting between gallery openings, fundraisers, and private showings. She was magnetic at those events, the kind of woman who could light up a room with her laugh. I admired that about her. Maybe envied it too. But somewhere in the last year, small things began to shift. Lily's phone was always on silent. Her explanations for late nights were vague, and sometimes she returned home with that look in her eye, distracted, distant, like she was keeping a part of herself locked away. I told myself not to overthink. I had a history of suspicion, and I knew how easy it was to spiral. So I bit my tongue, swallowed my doubts, and kept moving. But then one evening, walking home later than usual, I cut across the street and happened to glance up at the second-floor window of our neighbor's house. Norman Briggs. And that's when I saw her. Lily, sitting on Norman's couch, her hand resting in another man's. She was laughing, leaning toward him with that smile I thought belonged to me alone. I froze on the sidewalk, breath caught in my throat. The sight burned into my mind like a photograph I couldn't tear up. My stomach twisted as I turned away and stumbled back to our brownstone, hands shaking. That night when Lily came home, she kissed me on the cheek, kicked off her shoes, and asked what I wanted for dinner. She acted as if nothing had happened, and I sat there staring at her, wondering if my life had just cracked open like my father's once had. After that night, I couldn't stop watching her. From the study on the second floor, I had a clear view across the street into Norman's windows. I knew it was wrong, spying on my own wife, but I couldn't let go of what I'd seen. Every evening, I sat there in the dark, peering through the blinds, waiting for some sign. Sometimes Lily appeared in those windows again, sometimes not. But whenever I thought I caught her silhouette, she seemed off, distracted, as though she were acting for someone else. Inside our own home, strange things began to happen. Objects misplaced, her scarf draped over a chair I knew she hadn't used, books moved from my desk, faint whispers at night that made me jolt awake. I told myself it was stress, overwork, paranoia creeping in, but deep down I wasn't sure. Finally I asked her, "Lily, I said one night as she poured herself a glass of wine. "Are you seeing someone?" Her expression didn't change. She didn't even flinch. "Thomas," she said carefully, setting the glass down, "you're imagining things again. Maybe you need to take a break from work stress." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded and let it go, for the moment. But my suspicions grew heavier with each passing day. I found myself drawn back across the street, this time not just watching. One late night, when the neighborhood was quiet, I crept over to Norman Briggs's house. He was an odd man, reclusive, rarely seen except for late-night walks with his cane and his muttered conversations with no one in particular. People called him eccentric. The back door gave way too easily, and inside the house, dust and clutter coated everything. But what stopped me cold were the walls. Dozens of photos, all of Lily. Some at gallery events, some outside our brownstone, and some, God help me, intimate, private moments inside our home. Photos that had been digitally altered to place her with men I didn't recognize, including the one I thought I had seen her with. My blood turned to ice. "Looking for something?" The voice came from behind me. Norman Briggs stood in the doorway, eyes glinting, his smile wide and unhinged. "You think you know your wife, Thomas," he said softly, "but I've been watching, planning. She's mine in the story I wrote." I confronted Lily that night. My words came out like shards of glass. "I saw the photos in Norman's house, did you know?" She went pale, her wineglass slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. "What photos?" she whispered. When I explained, her eyes filled with tears. "Thomas, I swear to you, I never, whatever he has, it's not real. I didn't know." And part of me believed her. But another part, the scarred part from my father's lies, ached with doubt. Norman had engineered something grotesque, a false affair, fabricated with doctored images and careful staging. But the genius of it was how it fed into my existing suspicions. He didn't just want Lily, he wanted me broken. The following days blurred. I tried reporting him, but Norman was meticulous. The police found nothing criminal in a house full of artistic projects. Without hard evidence, there was nothing they could do. Meanwhile, the whispers continued. Colleagues at work had heard rumors about Lily. Friends asked careful questions, their eyes full of judgment. Norman's poison was seeping into every corner of my life. Then the threats began. Notes slid under our door. "Stay out of my story, Thomas." Our locks tampered with, subtle enough to make me question my memory. I began sleeping with a baseball bat by the bed, every creak of the brownstone setting my nerves on edge. I couldn't live like that anymore. I hired a digital forensics specialist, someone who could dig into Norman's files, trace the manipulations, expose the lies. What he uncovered was staggering. Hacked social media accounts, photoshopped images, even fake surveillance footage. Norman had spent years weaving this web, long before I ever suspected Lily. His fixation wasn't just on her, it was on me. He wanted to dismantle my life piece by piece to prove he could rewrite my story the way my father once rewrote our families. The final confrontation came one stormy night. I went back to Norman's house, this time with the police behind me, armed with the evidence the specialist had gathered. Inside his apartment, the walls were worse than before. Not just photos of Lily now, photos of me. My routines mapped out in obsessive detail. When they cuffed him, Norman didn't resist. He just looked at me with a smile that chilled me to my bones. "You can lock me up, Thomas," he said, "but the story isn't over. It never ends." Norman was arrested, but the damage was done. Lily and I stayed together, though the shadow of suspicion still lingered between us. I wanted to believe her, to trust her again fully, but every time her phone buzzed in the night, my chest tightened. I started therapy, hoping to untangle the mess Norman left behind. The nightmares are frequent. Images of Norman watching from across the street, of Lily's laughter in someone else's arms. Weeks after his arrest, I received a letter. postmarked from the state correctional facility. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Dear Thomas, stories never really end. They just pause between chapters. I'll be seeing you again. I tore it up, but the words stayed etched in my mind. Now, every misty morning on Chestnut Street, I glance at Norman's darkened windows, half expecting to see him there again, watching, waiting. They say family is the anchor that keeps you steady when the storms roll in. That was always my dream. A stable home, kids who felt safe, a marriage that lasted longer than my parents did. I grew up watching my mom and dad tear each other apart in courtrooms and custody hearings. I swore to myself I would never let that happen to my family. Stability. That was my religion. When I met Claire in college, she was like sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky. She was bold, adventurous, the kind of girl who convinced me to skip studying to drive up into the mountains at midnight just to watch the stars. She thrived on chaos, but back then, I thought it was charming. I was the cautious one, the engineer who measured twice before cutting once, the guy who lived by schedules. I thought we balanced each other. We got married young. Ethan came first, then Lily, and for a while it really did feel like the dream was working. We bought a cozy house in Boulder, surrounded by trees and hiking trails, the kind of place where you know the neighbors' names and kids ride bikes on the sidewalk. I built routines around the kids, bedtime stories, Saturday pancakes, Sunday hikes. Claire said she wanted adventure, but I figured family life would mellow her, anchor her. I was wrong. By our 10th year together, the cracks started to show. Claire began spending nights out with friends. She posted pictures online from parties I wasn't invited to. She was the kind of woman who craved attention, who thrived when people were watching. I kept telling myself it was harmless. I made excuses. She's just blowing off steam. She's still young at heart. The breaking point came one night when she asked me to try swinging. Against every fiber of my being, I said yes, thinking maybe it would satisfy her. Maybe it would keep us together. I hated it. She loved it. I stopped after one time, but she didn't. She called me boring and controlling, like my desire for stability was some kind of cage. I should have seen the writing on the wall then. Instead, I doubled down on being the responsible one. I kept the house running, took care of the kids, made sure bills were paid, and she slipped further away, like sand running through my fingers. The real warning came from someone I never expected, Amy Collins, my childhood friend. We'd grown up on the same street, walked to school together, drifted apart in college, but kept in touch over the years. Amy knew me better than most, maybe better than Claire ever tried to. One rainy evening in the spring of 2018, Amy asked to meet for coffee. I thought it was just to catch up, but the moment I saw her face, I knew it was something else. "Daniel," she said, stirring her drink. "I need to tell you something. It's about Claire." My stomach tightened. "What about her?" "She's been bragging," Amy said carefully. "To friends, to people I know. She's sleeping around, more than one guy. And she's been talking about money. Your money. She said something about planning a way out, maybe even divorce." I stared at her, numb. "That doesn't sound like Claire." Amy gave me a look. "You've always wanted to believe the best in her, but you can't ignore this anymore." That night I went home in a fog. Claire was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, glass of wine in hand. She looked up at me and smiled like nothing was wrong. I wanted to believe Amy was mistaken, but once you hear something like that, you start to see everything differently. I noticed the receipts first. Fancy dinners at places we'd never gone together. Then the phone calls she took in the bathroom, the quick deletions of messages. A bottle of wine I hadn't bought tucked in the trash. When I confronted her gently, trying not to start a war, she smirked. "Claire," I said, "I know you've been meeting someone else. Is that true?" She didn't even blink. "You're imagining things again. Stop being paranoid. It was the same trick she always used. Make me doubt myself. But this time I couldn't shake the feeling that she was preparing for something bigger, something worse than just affairs. And the kids, Ethan and Lily, were starting to notice. Ethan asked me one night, "Why isn't Mom home for dinner anymore?" Lily cried when Claire left with a suitcase and didn't come back for 2 days. That's when fear turned into resolve. I couldn't let Claire's chaos destroy the only thing that mattered more than my pride, my children. I tried to be civil. I tried to talk. But Claire wasn't interested in saving our marriage. She wanted to win. When I pushed harder about her drinking, her absences, her secret spending, she flipped the script. Suddenly, she was the victim. She started telling neighbors that I was controlling, even abusive. She raised her voice in public arguments, making me look like the aggressor while she played the wounded wife. One night, she called the police after a fight we had about the kids being left alone. She told them I shoved her. I hadn't even touched her. Luckily, I'd started recording our conversations on my phone. I played the audio back for the officers, which proved she was lying. They left, but the look she gave me afterward was chilling, like I'd ruined her perfect play. I realized then that Claire wasn't just reckless. She was dangerous. If she could convince the world I was an abuser, she could take Ethan and Lily from me. She could ruin everything. So I fought fire with fire. I recorded everything. I saved receipts, messages, witnesses. Amy became my ally, keeping track of Claire's nights out and the things she bragged about to mutual friends. The house became a battlefield. Claire would vanish for days, then return acting like nothing was wrong. The kids clung to me, confused and frightened. I tucked them in at night with promises I wasn't sure I could keep. But deep down, I knew what was coming. A custody battle. A fight for the very soul of our family. And I knew Claire would do anything to win. By the time I filed for custody, I was running on fumes. Work, kids, legal paperwork. It was survival mode. Claire showed up to court polished, smiling, pretending to be the perfect mother. Her lawyer painted me as controlling, unhinged, even abusive. But I had evidence. I played recordings where she admitted to leaving the kids alone, to spending our money recklessly, to drinking until she blacked out. Amy testified about Claire's bragging, her nights out, her neglect. The judge listened carefully, eyes narrowing as the truth came out. When Claire tried to cry on the stand, her story unraveled under cross-examination. Finally, the judge's gavel came down with words I'll never forget. Daniel Hartman will have sole custody of Ethan and Lily. Claire Hartman's visitation will be supervised. The weight lifted off my chest was indescribable. Relief, sadness, exhaustion. It all hit at once. Claire stormed out of the courtroom, her eyes full of venom. She checked herself into a mental health facility shortly after, though whether it was voluntary or forced, I never found out. All I knew was that, for the first time in years, I felt like my kids were safe. Life didn't return to normal overnight. The kids struggled with the absence of their mother, and I struggled with the memories of what we'd gone through. There were nights I woke in a sweat, dreaming that Claire had come back to take them, that the judge's words had been erased. But slowly we built something new. I cooked meals with Ethan and Lily. We hiked the trails together. We laughed again. I became both parents, and though it was exhausting, it was worth it. Claire tried to contact us a few times, but the court made sure it was supervised. I didn't block her completely. I wanted the kids to have some connection, if only to remind them that her chaos wasn't their fault. But I never let her near them without boundaries. Years later, I still feel her shadow sometimes. In quiet moments, I wonder if she'll show up again, trying to reclaim what she lost. But I don't live in fear anymore. I live in truth. And I've learned that stability isn't about pretending everything is perfect. It's about fighting for what matters, even when it means facing the darkest parts of someone you once loved. Love without respect will always collapse, no matter how strong it looks on the outside. Ignoring red flags only delays the damage, and trying to fix someone who thrives on chaos will only drag you down with them. Protecting your children, your peace, And your truth sometimes means letting go of the person you thought you needed most. Stability isn't found in holding on, it's found in knowing when to let go. If you had asked me 3 years ago what I feared most, I would have said failure. I've always been meticulous about details, reports, presentations, even grocery lists. Anxiety runs in my family, and for me, it manifests in double-checking everything, making sure life doesn't spiral into chaos. For a long time, I believed that vigilance was enough to keep things stable. What I didn't realize is that chaos doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it grows quietly, right inside your home. I met Emily at a design conference in Seattle, back when she was still freelancing on small projects. She had this restless energy, like she was always on the edge of something bigger. I was a marketing executive, steady and detail-obsessed, the kind of guy who carried a planner everywhere. She made me laugh at myself, taught me to loosen up, to live outside of schedules. I thought we balanced each other perfectly. For 8 years, I believed we did. Our condo at 58 Pineview Terrace overlooked Lake Union, and in summer, the sunsets painted the water gold. We'd sit on the balcony with wine, talking about her latest projects and my work campaigns. Life felt comfortable, until the comfort began to crack. It was small at first, late-night texts on her phone, numbers I didn't recognize. When I asked, she said, "Clients, brainstorming sessions don't follow a 9-to-5 schedule." Her smile disarmed me, and I forced myself to believe her. But names like D or Shadow didn't sound like clients. Then came the night I followed her. She told me she was heading to her studio downtown, but instead, she slipped into a black SUV parked near the condo. I expected the car to pull away, but it didn't. It stayed, engine idling, lights off, as if waiting for me to make a move. 20 minutes later, it drove off. Too smooth, too deliberate, like someone staging a scene. That's when the fear started creeping in. Not just fear of losing her, but fear of something larger, something orchestrated. Within weeks, I began noticing strange signs. Videos of me arriving at work appeared in anonymous emails. Notes showed up on our doorstep. Handwritten messages like, "We see you," or "Careful what you ignore." At first, I thought it was coincidence, maybe a prank, but the notes became personal. They mentioned my morning jogs by the lake, my favorite coffee shop, even the brand of sneakers I wore. One night I found her studio laptop abandoned near the pier, screen glowing faintly with open design files. "Emily, why was your laptop out by the pier at midnight?" I asked. She smiled, tilting her head like I was being silly. "You're imagining things. Sometimes I work wherever I can get inspiration." I wanted to believe her. God knows I tried. But the truth is, when you already struggle with anxiety, doubt doesn't just knock, it moves in. Every sound in the night, every flicker of headlights outside the condo became a signal that I was being watched. And I was. I just didn't know yet that the person orchestrating it all was the same woman I kissed goodnight every evening. The stalking escalated in ways I couldn't ignore. Packages I didn't order appeared at work. Gadgets, odd trinkets, even a burner phone wrapped in black tape. My coworkers whispered about the weird deliveries. My boss pulled me aside, asking if I was okay. I lied through my teeth, saying everything was fine, but my hands shook during meetings. At home, Emily played the role of supportive wife. She rubbed my shoulders, reminded me to breathe when panic hit. But the phone kept buzzing at odd hours, and she always angled the screen away. I confronted her one night while rain pattered against the windows. "Why do I keep finding things I can't explain?" I asked. She put down her wine glass, her face calm, almost rehearsed. "Ryan, you've been under so much pressure. With your anxiety, it's easy to connect dots that don't exist. You need to trust me." Trust me. 2 words that cut both ways. I hired a private investigator. His name was Griffin, a wiry man with tired eyes who'd seen too many messy marriages. I gave him everything: the SUV sightings, the notes, the laptop by the pier. He listened, scribbled in a notebook, and finally said, "If she's hiding something, we'll find it." 3 weeks later, Griffin called me into a diner booth and dropped a folder on the table. Inside were photographs of Emily with a man I didn't recognize at first. Tall, dark hair, sharp features. His name was Derek Stanton, Griffin explained, a driver with a background in tech security. He wasn't just Emily's lover. He was the one orchestrating the stalking. The SUV was his. The notes, the videos, even the emails. Derek was creating chaos around me while slipping into Emily's arms. I stared at the photos until my vision blurred. "Why?" I asked, voice barely audible. Griffin sighed. "Because when people want to cover an affair, sometimes they build a bigger distraction. You're not just being cheated on, Ryan. You're being played." The betrayal was layered. Not only had Emily broken our vows, but she'd allowed someone to weaponize my anxiety, to make me doubt my own sanity. That night I confronted her. My hands trembled as I asked, "Why are there videos of me? Is this about the affair?" She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned against the counter, eyes cold. "You never really noticed me, Ryan. Maybe now you'll pay attention." It was the kind of answer that burned more than denial. After that night, reality itself began to twist. Emails were sent from my accounts that I didn't write. Coworkers received strange messages from me. Packages I never ordered arrived weekly, some harmless, some bizarre, like a child's toy smeared with red paint. I knew it was Derek's doing. His tech skills made him invisible, always one step ahead. And Emily? She gaslit me at every turn. "Ryan, you're paranoid," she said one morning, brushing her hair in the mirror. "Maybe you should talk to your therapist about upping your meds." She said it sweetly, but her smile was razor sharp. One night I followed her again. She slipped into the condo's underground parking garage. I stayed far enough back to avoid being seen. When I turned the corner, I saw her pressed against Derek, kissing him like I never existed. I stepped forward, my voice breaking. "Emily!" She spun, her face flashing with annoyance more than guilt. "This is your fault," she spat. "Your suspicion made him hostile. Do you see what you've done?" Her words hit like a hammer. She wasn't even trying to deny it. She was rewriting the story, making me the villain. I felt like the ground had vanished beneath me. Piece by piece, the puzzle fell into place. The stalking, the SUV, the notes. It wasn't random. It wasn't paranoia. It was Emily and Derek together, orchestrating everything. I confronted her one final time in the condo, the city skyline glowing through the windows. My voice cracked but stayed steady. "You set this up, all of it. Me, the SUV, the videos, everything." Emily smirked, her eyes glittering with something colder than hate. "I told you to trust me. Maybe now you'll understand that some people lie to survive boredom." Boredom. That was her explanation. Years of love, trust, and support, shattered because she wanted excitement. I didn't hit her, I didn't scream, I just walked away. Because in that moment I realized nothing I said would matter. She wasn't the woman I married. She was a stranger who had worn Emily's skin. I moved out the next morning. Took only essentials, clothes, laptop, books. I left the condo, the balcony, the sunsets. They belonged to ghosts now. Emily disappeared for weeks. Cryptic emails arrived in my inbox. Half-finished sentences, strange phrases like, "still watching" or "not done yet." Derek vanished too. Whether they were together or not, I didn't care anymore. I took time off work, checked into therapy, tried to reclaim pieces of myself. Anxiety still stalks me, but now I know the difference between fear born in my head and fear planted by others. Some nights, I walk by Lake Union and watch the boats drift lazily across the water. Life feels quieter now, but I move cautiously. Not just because I fear another Derek or Emily, but because I know how easily reality can be bent by someone you trust. The scariest part isn't that she betrayed me. It's how deeply she made me doubt my own sanity. That's a wound slower to heal than any broken heart. If you ask me what my greatest flaw is, I'd tell you it's trust. I grew up believing that people meant what they said, that love could survive on patience and loyalty, and that if you gave someone your heart, they'd protect it the way you protected theirs. For most of my life, that belief served me well. As a history professor, I spent years teaching my students about betrayals on the grand stage, kings who lied to their people, nations that broke treaties. But I never imagined betrayal would walk through my own front door. My wife, Clara, was a nurse, compassionate, gentle, admired by her patients and co-workers alike. That's what drew me to her 12 years ago when we met at a fundraiser. I was lecturing about the legacy of public health programs during the Depression, and she was volunteering at the event. She had this easy smile, the kind that made you feel like you'd known her forever. Within 2 years, we were married. For over a decade, life felt steady. We had our cozy apartment on Hawthorne Lane, a view of the river if you leaned just right out the window, and a rhythm to our days. I taught classes, graded papers, and spent evenings reading. She worked long shifts at St. Vincent's, sometimes overnight, sometimes double shifts. When she dragged herself home in the early morning light, I'd make her tea and rub her shoulders. But by late winter of 2024, things had shifted. My father had a massive heart attack, the kind doctors call a widowmaker. He survived, but just barely. Suddenly, much of my time was spent at the hospital, sitting by his bed, watching the monitors beep, and listening to the slow hiss of oxygen. Clara was supportive, at least on the surface. She offered to adjust her shifts, to check on him when I was lecturing. I thanked her, never suspecting what she was really doing on those nights. The first crack appeared one rainy evening. My father's condition had taken a sudden turn, and the hospital called me in. The corridors were dim, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air. As I walked toward the ICU, I saw Clara down the hall. She wasn't with my father. She wasn't with any of her assigned patients. She was slipping quietly into another room. I stopped, confused. Nurses go into different rooms all the time. Maybe she was helping. That's what I told myself until I saw him. Dr. Felix Monroe, a cardiologist at the hospital. Tall, charming, the kind of man whose confidence filled a room. He followed her in, and when he thought no one was looking, he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the kind of kiss you give a coworker after saving a patient. It was familiar, practiced, intimate. My heart sank into my shoes. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching my marriage crack open like a fault line. That night when we were home, I tried to be calm. The rain drummed against the windows, the glow of the streetlight spilling into our living room. "Clara," I said softly, "what I saw tonight, is there something I should know?" She blinked, too quickly, then forced a smile. "Ethan, it was a mistake. A stupid moment. Please, I don't want this to ruin us." Her words were quick, rehearsed. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I did. But as I sat across from her, watching her sip tea like nothing had happened, something deep inside whispered that this was only the beginning. For weeks I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. I told myself Clara had slipped, that people make mistakes, that maybe stress and exhaustion had pushed her toward Monroe. I wanted to forgive, to salvage the life we'd built. But the universe doesn't let you hide from the truth for long. It started with a bill. A charge for medication under my name. Medication I'd never taken. At first I thought it was an insurance mix-up. Hospitals screw up paperwork all the time. I called the provider, who confirmed the prescription had been filled at the hospital pharmacy. When I pressed, they grew vague. "Perhaps your wife picked it up on your behalf." Then another bill arrived, and another, all in my name. Medications, procedures, even small claims tied to patients I'd never met. At the same time, I noticed Clara becoming distant. She'd leave late at night saying she had extra rounds, or that Monroe needed her help with a research paper. She came home tired, distracted, her phone buzzing with messages she never let me see. When I confronted her about the bills, she brushed it off. "You're imagining things," she said, her voice calm but sharp. Maybe you're just stressed with your father being sick. Let me handle everything, Ethan, trust me. Her words were a knife twisted into my chest. Trust me. Trust had been the foundation of our marriage. Without it, what were we? I started checking our bank account. Money was missing. Transfers I didn't make, withdrawals I couldn't explain. When I asked Clara, she told me she'd been paying off credit cards or covering family emergencies. But when I pressed for details, her answers unraveled. At night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling while she slept beside me. I wanted to believe in her, to hold on to the woman I'd married. But the evidence kept stacking, brick by brick, walling me off from the man I used to be. One rainy evening, unable to stand the uncertainty, I hired a private investigator. His name was Carson, a retired cop with a gruff voice and sharp eyes. I gave him everything I had, bills, statements, fragments of suspicion, and asked him to find the truth. When Carson called me 2 weeks later, his voice was grim. Ethan, your wife isn't just cheating. She's running a scheme. Insurance fraud, falsified prescriptions, embezzlement. And Monroe, he's not just her lover, he's her partner in crime. My knees buckled as I listened. The affair wasn't about passion. It was about power. Money. A web of deceit spun right under my nose. And by staying loyal, by signing papers without question, by being the trusting husband, I was part of it. Unwittingly, I'd become an accomplice. The confrontation happened in our apartment late at night, rain hammering against the windows. I sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread in front of me. Bank statements, emails, even testimony Carson had gathered from patients. Clara walked in, setting her bag down like it was any other night. Clara, I said, my voice trembling but steady, we need to talk. She looked at the papers, then at me. Her smile didn't falter. Ethan, what is all this? You've been lying, I said. The prescriptions, the money, Monroe. I know everything. For a moment she said nothing. Then she laughed, a cold, hollow sound that chilled me to the bone. You always wanted to